Bonjour et bienvenue au 20e épisode du Monde Selon Fred. Alors aujourd'hui, on va commencer le chapitre fascinant du Millénium du Christ, qui est dans le fond la conclusion de l'ensemble des présentations que j'ai faites jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Je voulais vous présenter les deux grands mensonges de notre époque, mais les deux grands mensonges sont là pour cacher ce millénium et cacher le temps dans lequel nous sommes, la petite saison. Alors, c'est sûr que je comprends très bien la difficulté d'accepter tout ça, de se défaire des connaissances qu'on a depuis qu'on est jeune, ce qu'on nous a appris. C'est pas simple, hein? On vit dans un monde où l'image est nous a imbriqués de toutes sortes de croyances. On vit dans un monde hollywoodien où qu'on va dans l'espace, on fait... et il y a beaucoup, puis c'est la science, mais je pense que j'en ai assez montré pour comprendre que il y a la science, le scientisme, ce que je dirais, hein, c'est sous des apparences de science, c'est des croyances. C'est pas simple. Parce que c'est ça qui nous est enseigné dans les écoles. C'est pas simple. Alors, c'est sûr que, particulièrement, dépendamment de l'âge qu'on a, d'essayer de se défaire de nos croyances, parce que ça implique beaucoup de choses de prendre conscience de ça. C'est pas seulement d'en prendre conscience, c'est aussi, oh, c'est comment qui je suis, moi, dans toute cette histoire-là, tout d'un coup. Alors, il y a beaucoup, ça peut remettre beaucoup en question ce qu'on sait, puis de se faire dire qu'on s'est menti, se faire mentir depuis qu'on est jeune, c'est pas le fun. C'est pas une chose qui est le fun. C'était la petite saison, le temps de la grande déception. Mais comme qu'on va essayer de survoler, hein, parce que le millénium du Christ puis la petite saison, c'est un sujet qu'on pourrait étudier jusqu'à la fin de nos jours, mais comme je vous dis, le but pour moi, c'est de faire un survol. Ensuite, vous pouvez faire vos propres recherches, mais je dirais surtout, personnellement, je crois pas qu'il faut s'attarder à tout déterrer. Hein? Faut continuer à vivre, faut continuer à apprécier ce qu'on a, aider les autres, mais on peut pas tout déterrer les mensonges. Ils sont immenses. Mais par contre, en sachant ça, comme je vous dis, ça nous aide à avoir un recul sur les événements qui sont en train de se passer. Quand la petite saison va se terminer, seul Dieu le sait. Bon, on peut avoir des indices. Il y a des écrits. Les écrits sont là pour nous indiquer des... C'est comme une carte. Hein? Ça veut pas dire que si on a la carte, qu'on est rendu, puis qu'on sait exactement comment que ça va être, où est-ce qu'on s'en va. Mais on y va. On a notre carte. Alors, on va commencer, puis là, il va y avoir des sujets fascinants. J'ai une vidéo fascinante de l'histoire de la fin du millénium que j'ai dit que j'allais vous présenter. Donc aujourd'hui, puis à partir du reste des épisodes, je vais beaucoup, beaucoup moins parler. Je vais laisser parler, je vais dire, ceux qui ont des choses à dire en ce qui concerne le millénium, puis tous les écrits de la Bible, puis il y en a qui sont beaucoup, beaucoup plus calés que moi en la matière. Je les laisse parler. On va découvrir un peu les idéographies, les écrits des saints qui nous parlent du millénium aussi. Ce sera pour le prochain épisode, probablement, parce que là, on a déjà beaucoup de matière aujourd'hui. Donc, je vais laisser les gens parler, puis je vais vous présenter une vidéo que je dirais que ça a été pour moi un moment charnière dans la compréhension de tout ça. J'avais commencé mes propres recherches, tout, je voyais, mais il y a une vidéo charnière que je vais vous présenter d'une personne, d'une femme qui a fait une série de vidéos, mais curieusement, elle a fait comme une série de 12 vidéos. Elle a arrêté d'en faire. Alors, c'est comme si elle avait quelque chose à dire en 12 vidéos. Elle a réussi. Moi, je vais être plus en 20, 21, 22 vidéos. Elle a fait des très, très bons vidéos, je trouve, très concis, très explicatifs. Puis curieusement, son site a été abandonné, puis même, je dirais, hacké. Quelqu'un a repris son nom, puis c'était devenu toutes sortes d'autres vidéos. Mais par chance, moi, j'avais downloadé les vidéos, puis j'étais pas seul à avoir downloadé les vidéos. Il y en a d'autres. Alors, les vidéos se sont retrouvées un peu sur certains sites sur YouTube. J'ai même j'en ai même donné à certaines personnes que j'avais vu qu'il y avait une série de ces vidéos, puis là, je dis, hey, il te manque celui-ci, je peux te le partager si tu veux. Puis effectivement, ils ont pris, puis ils ont mis sur leur site. Alors, avant de commencer, de rentrer dans le millénium au complet, ben, je vais faire une petite introduction encore. C'est sûr que on va voir encore nos francs-maçons, Illuminati et compagnie. Ils font partie de notre vie. J'aurais beaucoup de choses à dire, mais là, c'est assez. On a assez parlé d'eux. Mais il y avait un petit vidéo que j'ai vu passer. Quand je les vois passer avant que je commence, je me dis, bon, je vais le montrer en même temps. C'est comme un résumé. Hein, on a parlé de la Terre plate, puis tu sais, la Terre plate, c'est un mouvement qui est gros. Mais quand je vous dis qu'ils travaillent des deux côtés, ah, oui, ils savent comment créer et contrôler les deux côtés, toujours pour créer de la confusion. Comme ils savent très bien comment nous séduire avec la musique, avec les arts, avec le cinéma, capter notre attention, tu sais, je veux dire, c'est des maîtres de l'illusion, on pourrait dire à un certain point. Ben, le petit vidéo que je vous montre, j'ai montré, ça dénonce quelques acteurs qui travaillent dans le camp de ces francs-maçons. Je suis capable aujourd'hui de les reconnaître assez facilement. Je vous montre, tantôt je vais même vous montrer une vidéo, il en fait partie, mais comme je vous dis, ça fait partie de leur modus operandi, de dévoiler les vérités aussi. Et ils vont le faire d'une façon, sont très, 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 c'est de très bons illusionnistes, sont capables d'être très, très, très crédibles. Mais ils causent beaucoup, je rentrerai pas dans toutes les facettes de leur jeu, ça m'intéresse pas, c'est le millénium qui m'intéresse à partir de maintenant. Mais je vais en mettre un juste pour que peut-être, si vous commencez à faire des recherches, soyez vigilants. Mais en même temps, je m'en ai servi, je le savais qui était, mais je dis bon, ce qu'ils disent comme au sujet de la Terre plate, ben là, tu sais, au sujet de la conspiration, hein, que ce soit les Joe Rogan de ce monde, l'autre Alex Jones, ils entretiennent, tu sais, les conspirations, ils nourrissent, c'est comme Alex Jones qui se fait poursuivre pour je pense, des centaines de millions de dollars, mais je sais pas s'il les a payés, mais je sais pas si où ce qui est prend, parce que c'est vraiment payant faire sinon des émissions YouTube, mais il a pas arrêté. Fait que, on va essayer de voir un peu, là, je vais vous montrer la petite vidéo, c'est juste un, un petit clip de 5 minutes. Soyez vigilants, c'est juste ça. Mais en même temps, c'est, ça fait partie, on va dire, de la partie. OK, on va commencer, on va aller voir notre première vidéo. Je vais vous le montrer. On écoute.
You know I didn't just blow the whistle on Flat Earth Dave because of a couple hand symbols, right? You know it's more than that? Well, if you don't, you should stick around. So yeah, he does the one eye symbolism and the literal Master Mason symbol, and he's flashing it across the screen very purposely. And this next one where he does it 1, 2, 3 times, where you'll see right here, 1, 2, 3, 6, 6, 6. But guys, come on. You know I'm not outing someone because of a few hand symbols. Did you notice the number 205, 205 feet? Yeah, I decided to gematria that. 205 feet, because it just kind of seemed like a random number thrown up there out of nowhere. And let's see what we got. Oh, 205 feet just happens to be Molech. Yep, Molech, or more commonly referred to as Moloch, which is in the Bible and just happens to be associated very frequently with that in the Bible. And Moloch is also associated with the saying, as above, so below. You know, I'm sure you've seen it with Baphomet doing the as above, so below, and hey, it kind of looks like Dave's friend Sean Hibbler here. It's a funny way to hold your hands. But that's just Sean doing it. It's not Dave, so I don't really have anything here. Or don't I?
I have a video called on my channel, DITRH, which you can watch after this, called The Real Finalists.
It's a funny way to point your fingers down, especially at the same time you're pointing up in the graphic.
Which you can watch after this.
Real coincidental, I'm sure. So he's doing that symbol. He's doing the Master Mason symbol. He literally is doing as above, so below, which is a reference to one of these disgusting deities like Moloch or Baphomet that these people worship. It literally has another graphic that when you gematria equals Moloch, he hangs out on Alex Jones's InfoWars and also pretends he didn't know Alex Jones the second time he was on when he had already been on one time. And just happens to be chummy enough with Roseanne to get on her podcast. No big deal. Yeah, okay. And if you think Roseanne's one of the good guys, think again.
Roseanne still not finished getting a few things off her chest after being fired in the wake of her explosive remarks on Twitter and the subsequent cancellation of her show. Speaking out for the second time in an interview with a rabbi, the latest podcast not only focuses on her Jewish faith, but sheds some light on how she's coping with the
chapter called Eat, Pray, Love, Conjure Satan. And when I was 12 years old, I signed a deal with Satan in my room, and I was there.
CBS doesn't condone this.
Wait a minute. Because I wanted to get famous no matter what, and, then I forgot that I had this deal with Satan and everything, and then I got really famous. And then one day I, had this tragic singing accident at
yes, I remember that, yeah.
And I realized then that Satan was coming for my soul.
What I'm realizing more and more and more is that if they'll go to the lengths to trot these guys out to defend this, don't you think they're going to cover their bases and have them infiltrate our side as well? Think about it. Most of the biggest names in the FE community are plants. And you don't get on shows like hers or Alex Jones unless you're part of their club. Oh yeah, and remember their as above, so below thing in the Baphomet and Molech? You know who else likes that? This guy. That's a literal Baphomet costume. Wait for it.
I'm not just MAGA. I'm Gothic MAGA.
They're all on the same team. And you know how you'll know for sure? Because the people that are on that team, they'll start making videos about me. They'll start trying to mock me. They'll start trying to say I've gone crazy and I'm paranoid. That'll be the tell. You'll know them by when they come for me. Now I am sick to death of looking at this guy's deceiving face. So I'm done doing this. I'm putting this out into the universe, and it's for you guys to decipher and for you to do whatever you want. but I'm not going to talk about this man ever again. Or this crony, or that crony, or this crony, or any of them either. And especially not that guy over there, or his little loyal following. I think what it is, they're actually just mad that they had to join a secret society to figure out all this hidden knowledge, and I just figured it out on my own. Cool, guys. Maybe next time you can just research. But I am literally done with this entire group. I'm blocking them. I'm not talking about them anymore. I'm on to just sharing truth and trying to get people to find God, the God of the Bible, and Jesus. And I'm going to continue to talk about biblical Earth because we are in a stationary, non-rotating realm of some kind. And they're okay if you know that, as long as you don't know that it ties directly in to the Bible, because that is what they are planted for, to keep people away from that specific truth. And just in case you need to see how blatantly clear and obvious and intentional this was, one more time as I close out and say this was absolutely not for entertainment purposes.
Je trouvais que tu un bon petit résumé. Bon, est-ce que tous les signes qu'ils font, regarde, ça se peut que j'ai fait ce signe-là moi aussi à l'occasion. Ça veut pas dire que je fais partie de la gang. Par contre, le Christ disait souvent, on reconnaît l'arbre à ses fruits. Souvent, bon, alors, toute la Flat Earth Society, les débats sur. Ils créent des débats sur oui, la Terre est ronde d'un bord, hein, les boules avec notre Nil, puis en bas, là, c'est non, non, elle est plate. Ah, c'est créer des débats. J'ai vu des choses dans le domaine de la Flat Earth, mais incroyables, là. Même, il y a des histoires incroyables où ce qui change d'idée complètement. C'est sûr que je vais vous montrer d'ici la fin. En général, ceux que je vais vous suggérer d'aller voir, qui parlent du millénium, mais sont tous conscients d'à quel endroit qu'on se trouve, hein, sous un dôme, dans une création. En haut, c'est de l'eau. Mais il n'y a pas de débat là, pour essayer de prouver que non, non, la Terre n'est pas ronde. C'est pas intéressant. C'est terminé. C'est un coup que tu l'as saisi, tu comprends que oh, oh, OK, on est dans ça. That's it. Bon, je vais vous montrer un petit dernier peut-être sur les Fire Games de Lunch Break, qui fait partie malheureusement de la gang que je suis en train de parler. Mais bon, ils montrent des vraies choses. Comme je vous dis, ils aiment montrer des vraies choses. Par contre, il va parler d'une carte qu'ils ont détruite. Et des fois, tu sais, ils aiment bien faire des petites incursions de fausseté aussi. C'est pas important, c'est de voir encore l'ensemble de notre millénium qui a été détruit. Ensuite, on va rentrer dans l'histoire, le témoignage d'un dernier survivant du millénium qui est fascinant, très fascinant tant qu'à moi. Puis on va finir avec deux vidéos plus qu'intéressantes où ce qu'on va commencer à saisir la ligne de temps puis comprendre un peu plus en profondeur ce millénium-là. Alors, on commence avec notre Fire Game et notre carte qui a été détruite. Mais il va parler d'une carte, mais j'ai pas le temps, il va falloir que vous fassiez des recherches. Je vous ai montré l'autre épisode, tout ce que fondu. Mais on va voir des vidéos d'un que je trouve fait des très bons vidéos, Jason Jack, qui a fait des très bonnes recherches, puis c'est... On va voir une vieille carte comme la Terre. Il y a plusieurs cartes. Là, je pourrais rentrer dans les cartes, j'en ai accumulé au-dessus d'une centaine, où ce qu'on voit les changements géographiques, on voit que, oups, de l'eau revient, des lacs se forment, on voit le Canada, il n'y a pas les grands lacs, d'un coup, oups, les grands lacs apparaissent. C'est tout étrange, mais l'Apocalypse, c'est le moment que la Terre a été séparée. Ça fait pas des millions d'années. Malheureusement, c'est dur tu sais, j'ai mis des géologues, même les géologues, je sais pas si je l'ai mis dans l'émission ou je l'ai vu, mais tu sais, qu'ils disent non, je pense, ça n'a pas des millions d'années, des milliers d'années, même si c'est des épaisseurs incroyables, à cause que le volcan, non, c'est récent. On a vu le volcan exploser, puis tout d'un coup, on a des couches de sédiments comme nous, on a analysé ça pendant des millions d'années. Et puis toutes les méthodes de, d'analyse radiocarbone ou les nouvelles, faut pas oublier d'où ça vient. Hein? C'est comme tout notre système. C'est, c'est- Ils ont le contrôle, c'est le temps de la grande déception. Dieu le permet pour une raison très précise. Mais faut pas penser que l'ennemi a le pouvoir. Non, non. Il lui est permis de décevoir. C'est le Christ qui règne encore d'ici la fin de ce temps. Tout ça pour dire que la carte qu'on va voir, ben, faut comprendre que à l'Apocalypse, la terre s'est séparée. Dans le millénium, il y a plusieurs récits de mers qui reviennent, qui disparaissent, des chemins qui sont ouverts pour monter au camp des saints qui est au nord. Alors là, il y a beaucoup d'informations, je vous dis, c'est normal que c'est pas nécessairement, mais c'est ce qu'on va explorer dans les 2, 3 prochains épisodes. Puis je ne m'attarderai pas pendant 10 épisodes, là. J'essaie de vous faire un résumé le plus court. Si le sujet vous intéresse, ben, vous pourrez continuer vos recherches. On écoute le Fire Game pour terminer avec nos envahisseurs. Après, j'en parle plus. Si vous remarquez, j'ai pas parlé de nos non-nôtres aujourd'hui. Plus de NASA, non, même si chaque fois que je vois le journal puis que je vois les. Je fais, non, c'est assez. Je les laisse revenir sur Terre tranquillement. Je veux pas les déranger parce que là, ils vont atterrir. Tu sais. C'est un moment délicat. Il ne faudrait pas qu'ils brûlent quand ils rentrent dans l'atmosphère. OK. Brûle. Ou brûle, c'est fort. Fire game. On écoute ça.
We are back with another episode of the Fire Games. After an overwhelming amount of you saying that you enjoyed it and wanted more, I also wanted to make sure that the playlist had more than one city in it. So today, we are not just covering one city. We are going to be exposing 3. I also think that doing this for 3 more cities is going to show anybody in the world that may have still been on the fence after looking at Edinburgh, Scotland in episode 68. We are going to show the world that this is no fluke and that this fire narrative is worldwide and a massive key. So today, we are going to start things off with the city of Milan, Italy. And a quick recap of the rules to this game. I cannot leave the city that we are focused on for every single fire that is discussed for today. Every single fire will be located in the city that we are talking about. Are you ready to show the world that the mainstream narrative is full of patterns, full of coded messages, nods to this group that put them into place, all connected throughout the world? Well, here we go. The Basilica of San Lorenzo, located in Milan, a structure that we are told was constructed in Roman times. Well, maybe, because they tell us that it was built between the late 4th and early 5th centuries. But the exact date is, of course, you guessed it, uncertain. And we have no idea who commissioned it. So everything that is given is all according to scholars. You know, the people that are supposedly superior to us. People that just know all about these things. People that were never even there to see it actually happen. These incredible scholars tell stories. They tell tales that nobody else could ever even think of. Things that the archaeologists wouldn't even touch, saying that this was built by Augustus of the West. This is the Fire Games, so let's get to it. The scholars tell us the 11th and 12th centuries were marked by numerous disasters, fires in particular. Now, I have a running total of the amount of fires that we have found in this episode, like you saw in the first one, but we will also have another counter for the entire Fire Games series. After we cover multiple cities, the number is just going to get undeniable to the general public. In my opinion, it is going to open the doors for anyone that is on the fence about the mainstream narrative and give them an understanding that there is something massive going on here. The odds that every single KFC burns down in a single city is 0%. Yet we find so many buildings in one city that look incredible, sitting right in front of us, that have gone up in flames, but are still here, looking better than ever. And I can't wait to share what we found today. Santa Maria del Carmen, where we are told that this building was built in 1446, 578 years ago. And of course, the narrative just couldn't help itself but to know all about the 1330s, when they say that the first one, however, was destroyed in a fire. Basilica di Santa Stefano Maggiore, where the original church was built around the year 417, 1,607 years ago. We have this all documented. No, we don't. And 653 years later, on the dot, it was destroyed by a fire in 1070 and quickly rebuilt by those 1,075 people. San Bernardino alle Ossa, a church in Milan, in 1210, when an adjacent cemetery ran out of space. A room was built to hold bones. And you know, they have all of this written down in their local journal. So they just attach a church, no problem at all, in 1269. This was simple stuff back then, according to the mainstream narrative. You know, 755 years ago, when they were just born with the attaching churches to room skill, just embedded in their DNA. But once 1900 hits and the video camera comes around, this skill is just gone. And then they did a nice touch-up renovation job in 1679. And about 30 years later, you guessed it, it was destroyed by a fire in 1712. When we all know that this church that we're looking at is the original church. These stories are just that. In my opinion, they are tales. They are attempts to fit these incredible buildings into this insane timeline that we're given. Here is the ceiling to this place. It's incredible. The Royal Palace of Milan, where this was the seat of government in the Italian city of Milan for many centuries. Today, it serves as a cultural center and has exhibits. And in the 1600s, we are told that they finally completed it, the first of a series of theaters built in Milan, only to be lost to a fire and replaced. And we're just getting started. On the night of 24 January, 1695, a fire destroyed the court theater again. They fixed it all up and completed it in 1717. And of course, 6 years later, in 1723, a new fire accident damaged the ceremonial halls of the palace. And the incredible part about all of this, I've only seen it where they tell you who it was that actually started the fire and how it was done with proof. enough times to count on my hand. There was just a fire, and that was it, according to the mainstream narrative. So 3 fires from that palace. So we're gonna move on to the... Wait, what is this? Fire struck again, destroying the court theater on February 26, 1776. And in August 1943, the city was caught in heavy bombing, where it says even if the bombs only hit a small part of the roof. And in my opinion, just reading that, somebody was over there lighting this place on fire. Destroying these old world buildings is basically what they're trying to say, where it was not noted and quenched in time. The Teatro alla Scala, where they don't hesitate and just get right to the point that this is from the old world, where they give us the nod. A fire destroyed the previous theater in 1776 after a carnival. So this is the official story. Get ready. It burns down in 1776 when the new theater was built over a period of 2 years, and the theater was completed. 2 years to knock this out in the 1700s. Alarms should be ringing in everybody's head at this point. We all know that it takes our civilization like 2 years to build a sidewalk or any convenience store. This is a palace theater that stands the test of time, built in the 1700s in 2 years. And now it is time for our second city today, Melbourne, Australia. Let's start this off with the General Post Office that looks nothing like a post office. And in 1858, we are told a design competition was held where they had hundreds of people that were master architects. Of course they did. And without a doubt, one of the sketchiest stories I've ever heard, when shortly after the postal functions were moved into a smaller building, shortly after, a fire severely damaged the interior of the building. 1 day before, something massive happened in New York City. It's incredible, and a clear attempt, in my opinion, and possibly a successful attempt to destroy something inside this building. And I wonder what else was destroyed the day before the New York event that I was notified for whatever reason that I wasn't allowed to speak about in episode 59. So I'll just call it the New York event from now on. We all know what day I'm talking about. Here we have a prison that is clearly, in my opinion, from the old world. We see these kind of structures in Europe, where I was watching a comedy show. It was on the History Channel, and they call them castles when they are clearly prisons from the old world. So at least Melbourne knew how to repurpose it, where that sign is built by us, and it's a little crooked. HM Prison Pentridge, opening back up in 1851, after those master prison laborers threw this thing together with perfection. And this is what we are told. In 1987, we actually get a man pinned as the guy that started a fire. So now we can use my other hand and keep count of that stat. When Street Bomber Craig and 3 other inmates on the other side sealed off their section doors and set the place on fire, where Morris didn't make it. And this fire in this little prison was apparently more dangerous than the Baltimore Great Fire, and also more dangerous than the Toronto Great Fire, where $10 million in damages occurred, which is equivalent to $346.5 million today, and everybody was perfectly fine, according to the mainstream narrative. The Melbourne Town Hall, on 1 February 1925, a fire destroyed a large part of the town hall, including the main auditorium and pipe organ. And the arsonist was apparently a ghost. There's no mention of the individual that was just playing with matches inside the palace. The Block Arcade, a historic shopping arcade in the central business district of Melbourne, where all of this was constructed between 1891 and 1893. 2 years. And the whole thing was supposedly wrapped up and completed. Designed by architects 20 Man is the master architect that got this job done. On Friday the 13th in 1889, a huge fire gutted the George's Emporium, and this random fire accelerated Fink's plans to get this palace here in 24 months, where basically nobody was there to see the grand opening in 1893, because we know that this thing was most likely already here, and there was no grand opening. The Yule House, built in 1932, because the previous building burnt down and the insurance paid out, just like we've talked about so many times, where it looks like, in my opinion, they just went up to the top and engraved 1932 into the top and collected an insurance check. During the Great Depression, the Palace Theater, a theater that we are told replaces an earlier cinema on the exact same site, destroyed in a fire. The first one supposedly had construction begin in 1913, which was located on the exact same site, like we have seen so many times. In 1915, they converted the building, meaning that the first one was done in like a year or two. And they go on to say they converted it to a bunch of different things, trying to trip us up, when ultimately, in 1925, Griffin was employed for yet another remodel. And what do you know? Work was almost done. In 1926, the random fire destroyed the whole building. They somehow cleaned the whole thing up, and in 1927, the next one was done, which is logical and totally acceptable. No. The Regent Theater, supposedly built in 1929, when the cinema was subject to a disastrous fire. 29 April 1945, which destroyed the auditorium, organ, fly tower, and roof, where it's really starting to look like, all in my opinion of course, but looking like they were just saying there was a fire on the inside, where nobody could verify it, collecting the insurance check, and then keeping the building exactly how it was from the previous civilization, and rewriting the history in the meantime. And to give us our fourth city for this series, and our third one today, and to immediately show right off the bat that this was a worldwide massive narrative key, we will head to Dublin, Ireland, where this nod runs deep. We have the Aldborough House, built in 1795, where in 2013 it suffered fire damage in a random arson attack. The Custom House, we are told, was completed in 1791, where they say there was a previous custom house right here and needed to be replaced. When in 1921, the Irish Republican Army burnt down the custom house, where the interior was completely destroyed in the fire, and the central dome collapsed, and a large quantity of historical records were taken by the Irish Army. Oh, no. I mean, also destroyed in the fire. The Four Courts, located in central Dublin, completed 222 years ago, so they say. When April 1922 comes around, the National Army attacks the building, where the attack provoked a week of fighting in Dublin. In the process of the bombardment, the historic building was destroyed, where the west wing of the building was obliterated in a huge explosion, destroying the Irish Public Record Office, where they took thousands of years of archives away from the public eye. Oh wait, no. I mean, they were destroyed by the explosion and the ensuing fire. And they promised us they didn't steal the records, and they suggest the explosion was one big misunderstanding, and this was caused by the accidental detonation of their ammunition that was stored in that room, where thousands of years of archives were. So yeah, sounds pretty trustworthy to me. No. I mean, even the Guinness Brewery, who, in my opinion, got an old world building, this one went up in flames as well in 2009, when they say that they found it in 1759. All right, it's time to have some fun. And time to go after this narrative, one after the next, showing its flaws to the world. Rapid fire. Here we go. Built in 4 years, from 1814 to 1818, the building was destroyed by a fire. In the course of the rebellion, the Kildare Street Club, found in the year of the Constitution of 1782, when the club had planned to move from the old to the new building in 1861. But in November of 1860, there was a disastrous fire at the old clubhouse, where 15,000 books were destroyed. Linen Hall, a barracks that was used from the 1870s by the British Army, where In April of 1916, the barracks were set on fire by 1st Dublin Battalion, Irish Volunteers, to prevent the British Army from using the site. The Manresa House, originally known as Granby Hall, and then Baymount Castle in 1783. It was the residence of the Bishop of Down and Connor, and in 1851, it was renovated by the sisters because the building was damaged by a serious fire that year. Parliament House, Dublin, with construction beginning in 1729, and the original domed House of Commons Chamber was destroyed by fire in the 1790s, and a less elaborate new chamber with a dome was rebuilt in the same location and opened in 1796. Royal Hibernian Marine School, completed in 3 years in 1773. The school building was damaged by fire in 1872, causing damage and resulting in the school moving premises, and the St. Mary's Abbey, established in the year 846, so we are told. And in 1303, a great part of the abbey and church was destroyed by fire. Many of the city records and court pleadings in the chancery stored in the abbey were, of course, destroyed, where we have a total of 29 fires in this episode, and now a total count of 51 fires for the Fire Games series, and we are just getting started. This is, in my opinion, going to be one of the most insane stats where we are going to be able to show anybody in the world this series and hopefully have them see that something is extremely wrong with what we have been told, where in my opinion, it is time for the majority of people to come together and see that these buildings hold a much deeper story, one that we are not being told about, and one that needs to be explored by all of us.
The Fire Game. C'était pas celui qui avait la carte que je vous parlais. Je croyais qu'il avait parlé de la carte. C'est une autre vidéo. C'est pas très grave pour l'instant. On voit que le narratif, je sais pas si vous avez remarqué, sur quelques images, ça passait rapidement, mais il y avait des tramways sans fil, puis pas tirés par des chevals aussi. On parlait des photos de 1860. L'immense théâtre qu'on a vu construit en 1740, passé au feu en 1803. Je me souviens plus des dates, là. Mais vous avez vu la grandeur des pièces? Éclairez ça avec des chandelles. Parce que pas de fenêtre, hein? C'est étrange si on s'attarde à ces choses-là, t'sais. Mais quand on voit des films d'Hollywood, on sait bien, hein, oui, ok, c'est des films d'Hollywood. Là, j'avais pas, je viens de penser à un document que je voulais vous montrer au début. C'est juste une nouvelle que j'ai vue passer sur, que ça date c'est passé dans le journal en novembre 2023, puis j'étais là, je pensais quand j'ai vu le titre, je dis, ben voyons, c'est pas vrai. Ben, j'ai fait la recherche, mais ah ouais, ok, c'est vrai. Ben, je voulais juste vous montrer, j'ai trouvé ça drôle. Je vous fais, on va pas s'attarder à ça, là, puisqu'il faut, quoi que ça parle de nos pyramides, puis du Sphinx, le Sphinx qui aurait été créé par les vents, du moins des scientifiques ont étudié le vent, puis peut-être que ça aurait inspiré les Égyptiens à créer le Sphinx. Je ne vais pas m'attarder aux Égyptiens, aux pyramides. le monde avant le Christ, c'était aussi un monde à l'envers, d'une certaine façon. Hein? Il y a eu toutes sortes d'histoires, il y a eu le déluge, il y a eu le monde après. Ce qu'il faut comprendre, c'est les anges déchus, si on lit l'histoire, hein, il n'y en a pas juste eu un. Ils sont nombreux. Ils ont fait beaucoup d'enfants aussi parce qu'ils sont mélangés aux femmes humaines qu'ils trouvaient très belles. Une chose qu'ils adorent, c'est se faire adorer. Donc, les pyramides et tout ce monde féerique, je mets des parenthèses, ça fait pas partie du millénium. Non, comme l'Empire romain faisait pas partie du millénium. Mais ceux qui dirigeaient avaient beaucoup de connaissances, beaucoup plus qu'on pense, parce que nos déchus, ils meurent pas. Nos déchus connaissent beaucoup de choses. Ils peuvent juste plus retourner d'où ce qu'ils viennent. Mais la connaissance, ça, ils l'ont. Et ils l'ont transmis aussi, hein, à leurs enfants et à certains hommes autour de eux qui leur servaient sûrement de bras droit ou bras gauche. Fait que on va juste visionner tranquillement l'article. Je trouvais ça drôle, puis vous allez voir, j'ai fait une recherche sur le personnage principal de l'article. Et j'ai dit, ah tiens donc, gardons ça. Je vous montre ça à l'instant. Alors, voici l'histoire en question. Passée dans le journal de Montréal, si je crois, le 1er novembre 2023. Donc, le grand sphinx de Gizeh aurait été sculpté par le vent, ont découvert des scientifiques. Ils ont testé une théorie vieille de 40 ans sur la vraie histoire de sa construction. Bon, écoute, les historiens ont découvert, je ne vais pas rentrer dans l'ensemble de l'étude. Si vous voulez la voir, vous pouvez aller la lire, c'est sur l'Internet. Mais ce que j'ai bien aimé, c'est le fameux géologue Farouk El-Baz. Elle, hein? Je ne sais pas si vous... Elle, je dis ça comme ça. Elvis, Elon Musk, il aime bien les L. Oh, il y en a beaucoup de L. Ok, Fred, là, t'es fou, là, t'exagères. Bon, oui, peut-être. OK, mais enfin, tu sais, c'est nos scientifiques qui ont découvert que le vent aurait probablement inspiré la construction du Sphinx. Parce qu'ils ont fait des études, puis ont vu que les ingénieurs ont choisi de remodeler sa tête à l'image de leur roi. Bon, là, ça aurait été remodelé, transformé. Car il y a toutes sortes de théories. Ça, c'est toujours aussi pour nous divertir et nous... Comment ils ont construit ça, là? Regardez, je pense que on en a vu assez pour savoir que les constructions n'ont probablement jamais été faites comme nous on construit présentement. En partie, oui, mais bon, quand moi j'ai lu les écrits du Millennium, puis que j'ai vu comment les saints venaient aider, comment les récits des anges auraient aidé à construire plein de bâtiments aussi dans un autre passé, et thèse les anges déchus, je n'en sais rien, mais on va s'arrêter sur le sujet pour l'instant, mais je veux aller voir. J'ai fait la recherche sur ce fameux monsieur. Hein, ce monsieur, comment il s'appelle? Fakri, Farouk Elbaz. Alors, Farouk Elbaz, Space Odyssey from NASA, c'est tombé là-dessus, mais je dis, voyons. Farouk Elbaz once trained astronaut who were planned for 1969 Apollo main landing. J'ai dit, wow, ah, ça, c'est notre Farouk Elbaz. Non, 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 avec une espèce d'image de lune en arrière, que c'est pas du tout un franc-maçon. Non, 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 non. C'est- ou un Illuminati, ou un ami de Walt. C'est peut-être le père de Elon. Who knows? Enfin, je trouvais ça très drôle de retrouver ce personnage qui s'occupe des pyramides à aussi s'occuper, tu sais, de Star Trek et de l'espace. Je trouvais que c'était une drôle de coïncidence. Ça va pour ce chapitre-là. On va les laisser aller, on va se concentrer maintenant, dorénavant, sur notre millénium. Mais bon, ah, Fred, t'es fou, les anges déchus. C'est sûr que là, nous, on a une conception d'histoire qui a des millions d'années, le petit poisson, la cellule. Il y a toute une conception, un concept qui est théorique, mais qui est supposé être scientifique. Oh, mais il n'y a rien prouvé, ne serait-ce que des histoires. On va le voir dans le dernier vidéo aujourd'hui, des choses intéressantes, mais c'est vous seriez étonné. Là, je peux pas tout, hein, je commencerai pas à lire la Bible avec vous ici, là. Et moi, je suis pas un expert, loin, loin de là. Mais toutes mes recherches m'ont amené à la relire quand même. J'ai pas tout relu, mais j'en ai lu beaucoup. Et c'est étonnant le nombre de fois qu'on parle des déchus et de faire attention, qu'ils sont capables de se transformer puis d'avoir l'apparence des hommes. Il dit, faites attention. Vous allez penser que c'est un homme, mais c'est pas des hommes. Ils ont le physique, l'apparence, mais ils sont différents. Alors, c'est juste que vous ayez une notion que, OK, oui, mais là, Fred, la Bible, c'est toutes des histoires, ça, oui, oui, c'est des histoires, comme les Fire Games qu'on vient de voir, c'est des histoires, tu sais, des buildings incroyables construits sans instruments mécaniques en 2 ans seulement. Oui, mais là, tout le monde s'y met. Oh, oui, hein, oui, oui, tout le monde se mettait à travailler. Il était 2000 dans le village, mais construisait un théâtre. Enfin, je me calme. On laisse ça de côté. Puis je vais laisser dorénavant, j'ai de la misère, je vais laisser les autres parler. Parce que là, il nous reste 3 vidéos pour aujourd'hui, sont super intéressantes tant qu'à moi. L'histoire du dernier survivant, je l'appelle, du millénium. Curieusement, en plus, les écrits ont été trouvés à Montréal, ce qui rend encore pour moi l'histoire plus fascinante. Je connais même le quartier un peu où ce que ça a été trouvé. Euh, on va rentrer dans cette époque. Fait que le prochain vidéo, je trouve, enfin, je voulais vous montrer, attendez 2 petites secondes. Oui, j'avais ce petit document-là que je voulais vous montrer, que je trouvais qu'il était quand même important. Parce ils vont parler l'histoire en gros, j'espère. J'ai essayé de trouver un traducteur, mais il marchait pas assez bien. Il va y avoir un des vidéos tantôt qui va être traduit. Alors, je m'excuse pour ceux qui comprennent pas bien l'anglais, mais l'histoire est fascinante. Puis, ce que le dernier des survivants, c'est comme ça que moi je l'appelle, raconte comment les bâtiments étaient construits. C'était pas juste des bâtiments normaux qui avaient une fonction. C'était fascinant. Puis là, j'ai trouvé en même temps, juste avant de commencer l'épisode, je suis tombé par hasard sur quelqu'un qui a posté sur mon Facebook une série de toits. Puis là, on va les observer. Faut se mettre toujours dans l'esprit que il n'y a pas d'outils mécaniques, là. Et que, oui, mais là, oui, tu sais, on pense toutes sortes de choses, on s'est fait dire toutes sortes d'histoires, mais là, c'est juste des toits qu'on va voir. Puis ils sont tellement incroyables de penser que c'est juste fait au hasard. C'est comme manquer d'honnêteté, ou que c'est juste fait par décoration. Non. Il y a un but aussi, il y a une fonction, mais ils sont tous d'une grande beauté, mais oui, mais Fred, là, c'est tout des buildings de l'Orient. Eux autres, c'est l'islam, là. C'est pas le millénium du Christ. Ouais, il y a même de l'Iran, hein? Je sais pas pourquoi que présentement il y a une guerre en Iran tout d'un coup. Ont-ils des choses à détruire d'après vous? C'est d'une grande beauté. Mais le millénium était partout. 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 Et vous seriez étonné comment, comme Constantinople et des endroits comme ça qu'aujourd'hui, c'est. Mais ça a tout été transformé. Au début, c'était carrément. Tu vois, il reste des choses du millénium des fois, mais si tu retournes sur des images quand on a la photo il y a juste 200 ans, tu vois que, oh, attends, là. Alors, c'est sûr que là, il faudrait partir une recherche là-dessus, puis wow, je peux pas tout montrer, mais je peux vous assurer que ça fait partie du millénium. Là, on va s'attarder à un Russe, une histoire que je trouve mais fascinante. Puis je crois que ça va conclure ça conclut en beauté, je trouve, l'histoire des bâtiments du millénium. On peut regarder, puis douter, mais il faut s'imprégner, il faut apprendre à voir, il faut comprendre que beaucoup a été détruit, mais beaucoup a été transformé. Puis ça, c'est partout sur la planète, partout. dans toutes les villes, partout, ça a été transformé depuis particulièrement les 300 dernières années. Alors, je me tais et je vous laisse avec ce merveilleux témoignage sur le dernier survivant du millénium.
You're sitting across from someone very old. Their hands shake when they lift the teacup. The afternoon light makes dust visible in the air between you. They're telling you about their childhood, about a city that doesn't exist anymore, about buildings that were torn down before you were born, and then they stop. They look at you, and they say, "There's something I need to tell you before I die. Something about what things really were, about what we really had. Now forget everything you think you know, about history, ending cleanly, about the last of ancient things dying centuries ago, buried in textbooks, safe in the past. Because in 1952, in a small apartment in Omsk, an old man told his grandson the truth, and then he died, and the truth died with him. Except the grandson wrote it down. This is what he wrote. I found the notebook in 2019, an estate sale in Montreal. The seller's grandmother had emigrated from Russia in 1956. 4 years after the man in the story died, the notebook was in a box of documents, Soviet travel papers, photographs of people whose names no one remembered anymore, letters in languages the family couldn't read. The estate sale was in a basement apartment in Mile End. November rain drummed against the windows. The seller was a woman in her 60s who spoke French with an accent that had been worn down by decades in Montreal but still carried something else underneath. Something Eastern European, something old. She didn't want to talk about the box. She said her grandmother never talked about Russia. Never talked about what she left behind. Just worked, raised children, died quietly, in 1989 without ever returning. The box had been in the grandmother's closet for 33 years. The granddaughter had never opened it until preparing for the estate sale. The notebook was small, brown leather, cracked at the spine like dried earth. The leather was soft, worn by hands, warmed by pockets. Someone had carried this, had held it close. Inside, the handwriting was Russian Cyrillic, dated entries spanning 1951 to 1953. The first 20 pages were ordinary grocery lists, weather observations, complaints about neighbors, reminders about work shifts. The handwriting was neat, controlled, the observations mundane. But 30 pages in, everything changed. The handwriting became urgent. Dense paragraphs with no breaks, words crowded against each other as if the writer was racing against something. Against time, maybe. Against forgetting. Against death. The ink changed too, became darker, as if pressed harder into the paper. As if each word was being carved rather than written. The first entry in this new style was dated November 12, 1952. Grandfather is dying. The doctors say maybe 2 days, maybe 3. He can barely speak, but today he called me close. He grabbed my hand, his grip still strong despite everything, and he said, "Get paper, get a pen. I have to tell you something before I go. Something true, something they erased." The next entry was November 13th, 1952. I brought the notebook. Grandfather saw it and nodded. He told me to write everything down, word for word. He said, "They will say none of this was real. They will say we imagined it. But you will know what we lost. Someone has to know. Someone has to remember when I'm gone." Then came November 14th, 1952, the longest entry, 15 pages written in a single day, the handwriting getting shakier toward the end, the words sometimes crossing over themselves, but never stopping. Grandfather died this morning, but before he went he told me things. He told me everything. I wrote as fast as I could. My hand aches but I can't stop. If I stop, I might forget. And he made me promise not to forget. I paid 40 Canadian dollars for the notebook. The seller seemed relieved to be rid of it. I had it translated. Then I spent 3 years trying to verify what it claimed. What I found was impossible, but it was also true. The grandfather's name was Mikhail Sokolov, born April 1869 in Kazan. Died November 14th, 1952, in Omsk, 83 years old. I found his death certificate in digitized Soviet records. Cause of death, cardiac failure. No surviving family listed except grandson Victor, age 19. No other details, just a name, a date, a cause, and then nothing. The bureaucratic minimum. The official erasure that comes with death in a system that doesn't care about individual lives. But Victor's notebook gave Mikhail a different kind of survival. Victor wrote that his grandfather had been sharp until the very end, could recite Pushkin from memory, could do complex calculations in his head without paper, could describe buildings demolished 50 years earlier with perfect architectural precision, could remember the exact placement of windows, the precise angles of roof lines, the specific colors of stones. Victor wrote that Mikhail had worked as a postal clerk for 40 years, a quiet job, a safe job, the kind of job that let you disappear into Soviet bureaucracy and never attract attention, never be noticed, never be questioned. But according to Victor's notes, Mikhail waited until 2 days before his death to speak, as if he'd been carrying something too heavy, too dangerous, and finally, the weight of silence became heavier than the weight of truth. What Mikhail told Victor was this: he was Tartarian, not Russian, not Soviet, not Tatar, Tartarian. He said the word as if it still meant something, as if there was still a living nation behind it, not just a ghost on antique maps, not just a Western cartographic mistake, not just a confusion of medieval geography. He said, "I am the last one who remembers what it was, the last one who lived in the real buildings, who knew what they were for, who saw them working before they were changed. When I die, no one will remember. They will only know the lies." Victor, the whole conversation. It took 7 hours, apparently. Mikhail's voice was weak, but he wouldn't stop. Wouldn't let Victor leave to get help, to call a doctor, to bring medicine. He said, "Let me finish. This is more important than another day. Another day won't change anything. But this, if you don't write this down, it disappears forever." He described a Kazan that doesn't exist in any official record. A city that sang. Mikhail said he grew up in a city of red brick and white stone, where every major building had copper domes that sang in the wind. He used that exact word, sang. Not rang, not chimed, not resonated. Sang. Musical notes, harmonies, chords that changed with the weather. He said if you stood in the right spot in the market square on a windy day, you could hear harmonies, multiple tones layering over each other, rising and falling with the breeze like an invisible choir. He said the sound made you feel calm, made anxiety dissolve, made anger seem pointless. He said the buildings were not just buildings, they were instruments. The entire city was an instrument. Victor wrote, grandfather described the Kazan Kremlin as it was in his childhood, not the museum it became, not the tourist site. He said the towers had copper caps. He called them singing taps, that were removed in 1897 and never replaced. He said the caps were shaped specifically, angles calculated, metal thickness exact, to resonate at certain frequencies when wind passed over them. He said on feast days when all the bells rang and the wind was right, you could feel it in your chest, a vibration that made you calm, made you well, made you remember you were part of something larger. I checked this against official architectural records. The Kazan Kremlin underwent major restoration work in 1895, 1897. The official reports available through the Russian State Archive of Ancient Acts note removal and replacement of deteriorated copper elements from towers. The reports list the work completed. August 1897, copper elements removed, replaced with slate roofing, structural integrity restored. They don't explain why the copper elements were deteriorated. Copper doesn't deteriorate like that. It patinas, turns green, but it lasts centuries. The reports don't describe what shape the copper elements had, don't specify the angles, the thickness, the geometry. They just note removed, replaced, work completed. The copper caps are gone. The towers are silent now. Mikhail told Victor that his father had been a metalworker, specifically a coppersmith who specialized in architectural elements, had helped maintain the singing caps, had access to the technical drawings that showed the exact angles, the precise thickness of copper required, the mathematical relationships between different tower heights that created the harmonic intervals. He said his father brought the drawings home once, in 1889, when Mikhail was 20 years old. The drawings were on vellum, hand-drawn with ink that had faded to brown. The calculations covered the margins, numbers, ratios, geometric diagrams that looked like they belonged in an astronomy text, not an architectural plan. His father said the drawings were very old, older than Russia, from the time before, from when people knew things we've forgotten. Mikhail asked what that meant, the time before. His father wouldn't explain, just said before it all changed, before we forgot what the buildings were for. In 1918, Mikhail's father was arrested during the Red Terror. His workshop was searched. The technical drawings, all of them, decades of work, were confiscated. He disappeared into a prison in Sviazhska and never came back. No trial, no explanation, just gone. Mikhail was 49 years old when this happened, old enough to remember every detail, old enough to know exactly what was being erased, old enough to understand that asking questions would mean joining his father in prison. So he stayed quiet, got a job as a postal clerk, kept his head down, survived. For 34 more years, he stayed quiet. until the day before he died. I found 7 other accounts, different cities, different years, same pattern. St. Petersburg, 1934. A woman named Anastasia Volkov wrote to her sister in Paris. The letter survived because the sister kept everything, a habit of emigrants, saving every scrap of the homeland. The letter is now in a private collection in Lyon. I found a reference to it in a catalog of Russian émigré papers. I contacted the collector. He sent me a photograph. The letter was dated March 15, 1934, written in careful script on thin paper. Anastasia wrote, "They are changing the buildings again. The old stone circles around the foundations, the ones grandmother called boundary stones. They're digging them up and hauling them away. The workers don't know what they are. They think they're just old foundation stones, worthless. But grandmother told me those stones were placed intentionally. She said they regulated something, though she could never explain what exactly. Just that without them, the city breathes wrong. I don't know what she meant, but I feel it now. The air feels different since they started removing them, heavier, less alive." The letter ends abruptly. Anastasia Volkov disappears from all records after April 1934. No death certificate in Leningrad records. No deportation record. No prison record, at least none that have been digitized. Just gone. Her sister in Paris wrote back 7 times over the next 2 years. The letters were returned marked addressee unknown. Tobolsk, 1929. A school teacher named Dmitry Petrov was arrested for anti-Soviet propaganda and mystical thinking. His crime, according to the NKVD file I found in the Memorial Society's digitized archive, was telling his students that the old city had purposes we no longer understand. The file quotes his classroom lecture from March 1920, Our ancestors knew things we've forgotten. Look at the old buildings, the proportions, the placements, the relationships between structures. These were not random. These were not merely aesthetic. The buildings remember even if we don't. They were built to do something. To serve a function we've lost the language to describe. 3 students reported him. He was arrested the next day. Sentenced to 10 years hard labor. Destination Solovki, the prison camp on the White Sea. He died in transit. July 1929. Age 46. Cause of death listed as dysentery. The file includes a note from the interrogator. Subject showed signs of delusional thinking regarding buildings and historical knowledge. Recommended psychological evaluation. Evaluation not completed due to subject's death in transit. Samara, 1945. A civil engineer named Ivan Krasov wrote a report about post-war reconstruction. The report was supposed to be purely technical, assessing which buildings could be salvaged, which needed demolition, which required repair. But in section 7, page 23, Krasov wrote, "Several buildings scheduled for demolition show unusual foundation structures inconsistent with known Russian architectural practices of any period. The foundations extend to depths of 8.12 meters, far deeper than necessary for structural support. The foundation stones are arranged in circular patterns rather than linear footings. Some stones show evidence of metallic inclusions, copper or bronze elements embedded within the limestone. Purpose unknown. Recommend preservation for further study before demolition proceeds." His recommendation was denied. The demolition order came through in January 1946. The buildings were torn down in March 1946. Ivan Krasov wrote another report in September 1946. I found both reports in the Samara Oblast archive. The second report made no mention of unusual foundations, made no mention of metallic inclusions or circular patterns. The writing style changed entirely, became purely technical, purely descriptive, with no analytical observations or recommendations for study, as if someone had edited his curiosity out, or warned him that curiosity was dangerous. Yekaterinburg, 1923. An Orthodox priest named Father Grigory kept a diary. The diary survived because it was hidden in a church basement, discovered during renovations in 1997, donated to the local historical society. Entry from June 1923. The Bolsheviks ordered the removal of the church bells yesterday. All of them. Not just from our church, from every church in the city. They say it's to melt them down for metal. But the commissar, who oversaw the work, seemed more interested in the bells themselves than their metal value. He measured them, wrote down the dimensions, asked the bell ringers which tones they produced. Why would he need to know the tones if he's just melting them down? Entry from July 1923. Old Marfa came to confession today. She's 87 now, barely leaves her house. But she came to tell me something. She said her grandfather was a bell founder in the old days, before the Soviets, before the Empire even. She said the bells were tuned, not just to sound pleasant, but tuned to specific frequencies that her grandfather called the healing tones.
She said when all the bells in the city rang together, the sickness Lafitte. She said epidemics would come to other towns but spare Yekaterinburg. She said this was known.
This was why her grandfather's work was considered sacred. Not just religious, sacred in an older sense. Necessary. Entry from August 1923. They took Marfa today. I don't know why. She's an old woman who speaks to almost no one. But 2 men came to her house and took her away. Her neighbor said they asked if she had any papers from her grandfather, any drawings or writings about bells. She said no. They took her anyway. No further entries mention Marfa. Father Grigori himself disappears from records in 1924. 4 people, 4 cities, all saying the same thing. The old buildings were something else, were more than they seemed, had purposes we've forgotten, and asking questions about them was dangerous, fatal usually. Mikhail told Victor about the language. This part of the notebook runs for 6 pages. Victor's handwriting becomes even more cramped here, as if he was trying to fit as much as possible onto the page, as if he knew he was running out of time. Mikhail said there was a language that some of the old people still spoke when he was a child in the 1870s and 1880s. Not Russian, not Tatar, not any of the minority languages of the Volga region. Something else. He said it sounded superficially like Russian, used similar sounds, similar rhythms. But the grammar was different. The vowels were longer, more varied. And there were words for things that didn't exist in Russian. Concepts that required entire sentences in Russian but had single words in this older language. He gave Victor examples. Victor wrote them down phonetically, noting that he was probably misspelling them, that he didn't know if he was capturing the sounds correctly. Krasnoda, not just the color red, not just redness, but the frequency of red, used specifically to describe certain bricks. Mikhail said his grandmother would touch a brick and say Ito Krasnoda, and his father would nod and know exactly which bricks to select for a project, the red ones that resonated at the correct frequency. Stoyania, not just standing or remaining upright, but standing in correct relationship, used to describe buildings positioned relative to each other. Mikhail said the old people would look at a new building and say, Ono na stoyanie, it is not in standing, meaning its position relative to other buildings was wrong, broke the pattern, disrupted something. Zvonkost, not just resonance or sound quality, but specifically the quality of resonance that heals, used to describe bells, domes, certain architectural features. His grandmother would stand in a church and listen to the bells and say, Zvonkost slabaya, the healing resonance is weak, meaning something was wrong with the tuning. Dusha kamyan, literally soul of stone. But Mikhail explained it meant something more specific, the memory held in stone, used when talking about old buildings. The stones remember what they were built for, even if people forget. Vremyadu, the time before, not just the past, specifically the time before something changed, before something was lost. His grandmother used this phrase constantly. In the Vremyadu, we knew. The Vremyadu people built differently. He said his grandmother spoke this language fluently. She was born in 1809, died in 1890. One lived 82 years, spanning a time when the old world still lingered and the new world was already crushing it. She told Mikhail, when he was 22 and she was dying, when I am gone, no one will speak this properly anymore. The young people mix it with Russian. They forget the old words. The words that matter. The words that name the things we need. Names for. She made him memorize certain phrases. Prayers, he thought at first, but she corrected him. Not prayers. Instructions. For the buildings. For when someone remembers how to use them again. He taught them to Victor on that final day. Victor wrote them down, phonetically, with the admission, I don't know if I'm spelling these right. I don't know if they mean anything anymore. But grandfather said someone should know they existed. I had the phrases analyzed by Dr. Elena Sokolova, a linguist at McGill University, who specializes in extinct Uralic and Turkic languages. She spent 2 weeks with the transcriptions. Her response, these phrases are unlike any documented language I'm familiar with. They resemble Volga Turkic languages in phonology, the sound patterns, but the grammatical structure appears inverted. In Turkic languages, vowel harmony flows in a specific direction within words. These phrases violate that pattern. Intentionally, it seems, as if someone took Turkic and reversed the harmonic flow. Additionally, there are loan words from what might be Old Church Slavonic, but incorporated in ways that don't follow known historical patterns of borrowing. I would need more context to classify this properly, but I can say with confidence, this is not a dialect of any living or documented extinct language in the Volga-Ural region. It's something else, something we don't have a category for. The language died with the old people. probably sometime in the 1920s, when speaking anything other than Russian became ideologically dangerous, when being different became fatal, when uniformity was enforced with prisons and bullets. The pattern Mikhail described was specific, mathematical, exact. He said the old cities Kazan, Samara, Tobolsk, Yekaterinburg, Omsk, Tomsk, Ufa, Perm were built on a grid, not the grid you could see in the streets, which were often meandering, organic, following the landscape. A deeper grid, a hidden grid, he said. If you mapped the major buildings, the ones with copper domes or stone foundations that went down too far or bells tuned to specific frequencies, you'd see geometric relationships, perfect geometric relationships. He said his father had shown him this once, in 1889, using a survey map of Kazan and a straight edge. His father drew lines connecting the Kremlin towers to the Marjani Mosque, to the Epiphany Cathedral, to the Gostiny Dvor trading house. The buildings formed triangles, equilateral triangles, perfect 60-degree angles at each vertex. The distances between them followed specific ratios. His father had written them down. 1 1.6, 1 8, 1 2.4, 1 4. Numbers that meant something, though his father wouldn't explain what. Mikhail had memorized the numbers because his father said they were important, said they were the numbers that make things work. I tried to verify this. I gathered old maps of Kazan from 1890, before the major demolitions of the 1930s. I found them in the Russian State Library's digital archive, survey maps, architectural plans, city development documents. I marked every building Mikhail mentioned in the notebook: the Kremlin Towers, the Marjani Mosque, the Epiphany Cathedral, the Gostiny Dvor trading house, the Zilantov Monastery, the Church of the Exaltation of the Cross. I scanned the maps and imported them into CAD software, georeferenced them, corrected for distortion. Then I connected the buildings with lines. The triangles appeared, not approximately, not sort of. Exactly. I measured the angles: 60.2 degrees, 59.8 degrees, 60.1 degrees, within the margin of measurement error for 19th century surveying equipment. Equilateral triangles. I measured the distances between buildings. Then I calculated the ratios. From the Kremlin to the Marjani Mosque, 1,247 meters. From the Marjani Mosque to Epiphany Cathedral, 2,017 meters. Ratio 11.617. The golden ratio is 1.618. From Epiphany Cathedral to Gostiny Dvor, 1,247 meters. From Gostiny Dvor to Church of the Exaltation, 3,010 meters. Ratio 1:2.413. The silver ratio is 1:2.414. The same pattern appeared in Samara. I found pre-1920 city plans in the Samara Oblast archive, marked the major buildings, connected them. Equilateral triangles, golden ratio spacing, silver ratio spacing. Tobolsk, same pattern. Yekaterinburg, before the 1930s reconstructions. Same pattern. Someone designed these cities according to geometric principles. Someone placed the major buildings with mathematical precision across distances of kilometers. And then, starting in the 1890s and accelerating through the 1920s and 30s, those buildings were systematically altered or destroyed. The domes removed, the foundations dug up, the bells confiscated, the geometric relationships broken, the grid shattered. Mikhail told Victor the hardest part to believe. The part that sounds like superstition, like old wives' tales, like the kind of thing an old man might misremember or exaggerate. Except he didn't misremember. He was specific. He gave dates, numbers, observations. He said the buildings did something, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, physically, measurably. He said they regulated. He used that exact word, regulated, like a thermostat regulates temperature, like a valve regulates pressure, like a governor regulates engine speed. He said, in the summer, even during the worst heat, the old city center was cool, not shaded, cool. The air itself was different near the old buildings. It moved differently, felt different on your skin. In winter, less snow fell in the city center than fell in the outskirts just 2 kilometers away. You could see the line where the snowfall changed, right at the edge of where the old buildings stopped. He said people were healthier in the old city center, lived longer, fewer epidemics. When cholera swept through the region in 1892, it killed hundreds in the newer districts of Kazan, but barely touched the old center. He said this changed after 1897, after the copper domes were removed from the Kremlin towers. The summers got hotter, the air stopped moving the same way, the winter snow fell evenly across the city, and people started getting sicker more often. He said his mother noticed it first. She was meticulous, kept family records, wrote down births and deaths and illnesses, in a ledger that she'd maintained since her own mother taught her. 3 generations of family health records. She showed the ledger to Mikhail in 1905. He was 36 years old. She was 62. She said, "Look at the pattern. Before 1897, average lifespan in our family and our neighbors, 68 years. After 1897, 54 years. Infant mortality, before 1897, 1 in 10 children. After 1897, 1 in 4. She said, "They broke something when they took down those domes. They thought it was just decoration, thought it was just metal, but it was doing something, regulating something. And now we're paying the price." Mikhail watched her die of pneumonia in 1908. She was 65. Before 1897, women in her family routinely lived into their 80s. I can't fully verify this claim. Demographic records from Kazan in this period are fragmentary at best. The Russian Empire's record-keeping for non-nobility was inconsistent. The Soviet period's records are more complete, but also more suspect, altered for political purposes, gaps where inconvenient data might have been. The data that does exist shows increased mortality rates in Kazan after 1900, but this is usually attributed to rapid industrialization, increased population density, inadequate sanitation infrastructure. Maybe that's all it was, but I found something else, something that suggests maybe it wasn't. A German architectural journal from 1896, Zeitschrift für Bauingenieurwesen, Journal of Civil Engineering, Volume 44, pages 287, 312, an article titled Akustische Anomalien der Tatarischen Architektur, Acoustical Anomalies of Tatar Architecture. The author was an engineer named Wilhelm Schaffer, from the Technical University of Dresden. He had traveled to Kazan in 1895 as part of a Russian government initiative to catalog historical architecture before modernization. He spent 6 months there, made detailed measurements, took photographs, analyzed the acoustic properties of the Kremlin complex and several other major buildings. His paper is 26 pages long, highly technical, full of diagrams, mathematical calculations, frequency analysis. The key passage is on page 303. The builders of these structures possessed knowledge of harmonic acoustics, far in advance of current European science. The copper dome assemblies function as Helmholtz resonators, acoustic cavities tuned to specific atmospheric frequencies. Each dome is tuned to a different fundamental frequency, but the frequencies are related by precise harmonic ratios. 1, 1.6, 1, 8, 1, 2.4, 1, 4, 2, 3, etc. When wind passes over the dome structures, standing waves are established. These waves interact with each other, creating interference patterns that appear to modify local atmospheric pressure patterns over a radius of approximately 2-3 kilometers. The combined system appears designed to create a stable acoustic environment that dampens pressure fluctuations and maintains atmospheric equilibrium. For what purpose, I cannot determine. The local populations claim health benefits, but these claims resist quantification. What is undeniable is the engineering sophistication, the precision of tuning, the coordination across multiple structures, the mathematical relationships embedded in the architecture. This suggests knowledge of wave mechanics and atmospheric physics that should not exist in structures this old. The paper was published once, February 1896. It was never cited, never referenced in subsequent architectural or engineering literature. Wilhelm Schaffer published nothing else after this paper. I searched every German technical journal from 1896 to 1920. Number other papers by Wilhelm Schaffer. I searched university records. Number Wilhelm Schaffer, teaching at Dresden, after 1896. I searched German census records, death records, immigration records. Wilhelm Schaffer disappeared. A respected engineer publishes a paper describing advanced acoustic engineering in Russian architecture, then vanishes from all records. Either he stopped working, stopped publishing, and moved somewhere that left no paper trail, or someone wanted him quiet. Mikhail died before he could tell Victor everything. The notebook has a final entry from Victor, dated November 16, 1950, 2 days after grandfather died. 2 men came to the apartment. They wore civilian clothes, but they moved like soldiers. They said they were from the Ministry of Culture, showed identification cards I couldn't read clearly. They held them up and put them away too quickly. They asked if grandfather had left any papers, any drawings, any documents about old buildings or old languages. I said no. I thought they would leave. They didn't leave. They searched the apartment, methodically, professionally. They looked in places I would never have thought to look, inside the linings of coats, under floorboards, inside the stuffing of the mattress. They found grandfather's books. Old books, some of them. Books about architecture, about metallurgy, about city planning. They took them. put them in a canvas bag without explanation. They found a box of his father's tools, old metalworking tools I'd seen but never examined closely. The tools had markings on them, symbols I couldn't read, not Cyrillic, not Tatar, something else. They took the whole box. One of the men, the older one, with gray hair and a scar on his left hand, he looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "It's better not to talk about old superstitions. Better to remember your grandfather as a loyal Soviet citizen. Better to forget the rest." The other man said, "There are no such things as Tartarians. There is no lost knowledge. There is only Russia and history as approved by the ministry. Do you understand?" I said I understood. They leave feet, but I understood the real message. Say nothing. Write nothing. Remember nothing. Or disappear like grandfather's father disappeared. Like everyone who asked questions disappeared. So I will write this down. I will keep it hidden, but I will not speak of it. Not here, not in this place where curiosity is punished and truth is dangerous. Victor never spoke about it again, according to family stories passed down to his granddaughter. He emigrated to Canada in 1956, during the brief window when Soviet emigration was slightly less restricted, brought the notebook but never showed it to anyone, never translated it, never explained what it contained. His granddaughter found it after he died in 2007. She didn't read Russian, didn't know what it said, didn't know it mattered, put it in the estate sale box, and that's how it ended up in Montreal, in a basement in Mile End, in my hands. In 2019, 67 years after Mikhail Sokolov died, the last person who remembered what the buildings really were, what they really did, what was lost when they were changed. I went to Kazan in 2021, the air already cold, the leaves already fallen. I stayed in a hotel near the Kremlin, modern, efficient, identical to hotels in any Russian city. No character, no memory. I walked through the Kremlin on my first morning. Tourist crowds, guided tours, information plaques explaining the history, the official history, Catherine the Great, Ivan the Terrible, the conquest of 1552, the architectural restorations of the 19th-20th centuries. No mention of singing domes, no mention of geometric patterns, no mention of health benefits or atmospheric regulation. I stood where Mikhail said you could hear the harmonies, in the market square, equidistant from 3 towers. I stood there for an hour, waiting. There was no singing, just wind over slate roofs, just the sound of tour guides explaining simplified history to tourists who wouldn't remember it tomorrow. Just silence where harmony used to be. I found the foundations of the Gostiny Dvor trading house. It was demolished in 1933 during Stalin's reconstruction of Kazan. The site is now a parking lot, but if you know where to look, if you examine the ground carefully, you can see the outline. The foundations are still there, buried under asphalt, and 70 years of forgetting. I got permission. It took 3 weeks of bureaucratic navigation to examine the foundations. The city dug a small exploratory trench as part of a pipeline project. I was allowed 15 minutes of observation before they filled it back in. The stones were limestone, cut in blocks that weighed, by my rough calculation, about 12 tons each. No mortar, just friction-fit precision. The stones cut so exactly that no binding material was needed. I measured what I could in 15 minutes. The proportions matched Mikhail's descriptions exactly. The depth matched what the German engineer Wilhelm Schaefer had described in 1896. The official history says the Gostiny Dvor was built in 1770 by local merchants, using local labor and conventional construction methods. The stones say something different. They say someone who understood weight distribution and load-bearing physics and acoustic resonance placed them, someone who knew what they were doing, someone who had knowledge that shouldn't exist in 1770. Or maybe the building wasn't built in 1770. Maybe it was built earlier, much earlier, and someone in 1770 just claimed it, relabeled it, attributed it to themselves. The stones don't say when they were placed. They just sit there, silent, holding weight, remembering. I talked to an old woman who sold flowers near the Kremlin gate. I bought carnations and asked if she'd heard any stories about the old buildings, about what they used to be like before renovations. She looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were blue, faded with age, but still sharp. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, in Russian, "My grandmother said they used to sing. The towers. She said you could feel it in your bones. A vibration that made you calm. That made you remember you belonged somewhere." I asked if her grandmother had told her anything else. The flower seller glanced around, checking if anyone was listening. Then she leaned closer. Grandmother said people were different then, before they changed the buildings. She said people lived longer, were healthier, less angry. She said the buildings did something to the air, made it good for people. She paused. Then, but that was a long time ago, before the war, before everything changed. Grandmother died in 1963. She said it was better not to talk about old things, said it brought trouble. I asked if she believed it. She shrugged. Does it matter what I believe? The towers are different now. Whatever they were, they're not that anymore. She wouldn't say anything more, turned back to her flowers, arranging them in their buckets, done with questions. The questions that remain. Who were they? The Tartarians. Not the Mongol Confederation that history remembers. Not the medieval Turkic tribes. The other ones. The ones who built cities on geometric principles. Who spoke a language with words for frequencies and resonance. Who understood something about sound and stone and human health that we've forgotten. Were they an empire? A civilization? A network of city-states? Mikhail called them Tartarian, but was that their name for themselves? Or was it a name others gave them? A name that got confused, mixed up with other names, until it meant nothing specific anymore. The maps from the 1600s and 1700s show Tartary covering huge areas of Central Asia and Siberia. But the maps are inconsistent. The borders change. The descriptions are vague. Western cartographers drawing maps of places they'd never visited, filling in blanks with rumors and speculation. Were the Tartarians those map makers' confusion? Or were they real? And the confusion is intentional, later obfuscation to hide what was there. What did the buildings do? Regulate, Mikhail said. Atmospheric pressure patterns, health, longevity, emotional stability. Through acoustic resonance? Through geometric relationships that created standing waves in the atmosphere? Modern physics recognizes that sound waves can create pressure, can move air, can even levitate small objects under the right conditions. But city-scale atmospheric modification through architecture, that's not in any textbook. Either the Tartarians understood physics were only beginning to rediscover, or what they did wasn't physics as we understand it, was something else, something that doesn't fit our categories. When did they end? Gradually, Mikhail suggested, the knowledge fading across generations, the language mixing with Russian until the old words were lost, the technical understanding dying with the craftsmen who maintained the buildings. The timeline seems to be slow decline through the 1800s, accelerated erasure in the 1920s and 30s, final death in 1952 when Mikhail died. But when did it start? When did the decline begin? The copper domes came down in the 1890s, but were they already not being maintained properly before that? Were the skills to repair them properly already lost? Maybe the Tartarians were already mostly gone by 1800, and the 19th century was just watching the last remnants die. Why were they erased? The systematic removal of copper domes, the demolition of foundations, the confiscation of technical drawings, the arrests of people who asked questions, the intimidation of Viktor Sokolov in 1952. Someone wanted this forgotten, wanted it erased thoroughly enough that even asking questions became dangerous. Why? Ideological uniformity? The Soviet state couldn't tolerate the idea that something older and possibly better had existed before? Or something more practical, the buildings did something, and someone didn't want that something to continue? Or fear of knowledge they didn't understand? Fear of power they couldn't control? Who still knows? The men who came to Victor's apartment in 1952 knew enough to look for drawings and tools, knew enough to confiscate specifically the things that carried technical knowledge. Someone in the ministry knew what to look for, which means someone maintained records, knew the history, understood what was being suppressed and why. Those records might still exist. In some archive, in some basement in Moscow, or St. Cancel, or St. Petersburg, classified, restricted, waiting for someone with the right clearance, the right persistence, the right recklessness to find them. Or maybe the records were destroyed. Maybe the knowledge died with the people who kept it. Maybe we really are starting from scratch, trying to reconstruct from fragments and whispers and old men's deathbed confessions. What survives? The stones, the foundations buried under parking lots, the geometric relationships still visible in old maps, the ratios still measurable if you know what you're looking for. The stones are waiting, holding their positions, maintaining their relationships across kilometers, even though the structures above them are gone or changed beyond recognition. What were they waiting for? For someone to remember, for someone to understand, for someone to rebuild what was broken. Or maybe not waiting for anything, just persisting, surviving, existing as testimony that something else was here, something we don't understand, something we lost. I think about Mikhail Sokolov often, 83 years old, dying in a small apartment in Omsk, carried memories of a city that sang, of buildings that breathed, of a civilization that knew things we've spent a century trying to forget. He held it as long as he could, stayed silent as long as staying silent kept him safe, stayed alive, survived Stalin, survived the war, survived decades of Soviet normalization that erased difference and punished memory. But at the end, silence became unbearable. Truth became more important than safety. Legacy became more important than survival. So he told his grandson, and his grandson wrote it down, and the notebook survived. And now we know. We know there was something else. Something before. Something that understood harmony and geometry and resonance in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. Something that built cities as instruments, as machines, as living systems that served human health and well-being. The Baudelaire saw, we know it was systematically erased. The buildings changed, the copper removed, the foundations dug up, the knowledge suppressed, the language forgotten, the people who remembered arrested or intimidated into silence. We know the last person who truly remembered, who lived in the real buildings, who heard them sing, who knew what they were for, died in 1952. But we also know this, the stones remain. The foundations persist, the geometric relationships are still there, buried under parking lots and modern construction, and 70 years of deliberate forgetting. The ratios are still visible if you know how to measure. The patterns are still there if you know how to look. The machine is broken, but the pieces are still there. Maybe someone will figure out how to put them back together. Maybe someone will understand the mathematics, decode the ratios, learn what the buildings were designed to do, and how they did it. Maybe someone will rebuild the singing domes, will retune the city, will make it breathe correctly again. Or maybe Mikhail Sokolov really was the last one, the last person who knew, the last person who remembered, the last person who carried the truth. And what he knew died with him. Except for 30 pages in a brown leather notebook. Except for the grandson who wrote it down. Except for the estate sale in Montreal where history survived as an accident. Sold for $40 to someone who cared enough to ask questions. Except for you, now, reading this, knowing that something was lost. Something real. Something that mattered. Something that might have made us healthier, calmer, longer lived. Something that understood how stone and metal and geometry could serve human flourishing. The buildings remember, even if we don't. The stones are still in position. The ratios are still there. The machine is broken, but the blueprint persists in the foundations. Someone just has to remember how to read it. Listen, the silence itself is speaking. The absence is testimony. What was erased leaves a shape in its erasing. And that shape is still visible if you look carefully enough, if you measure precisely enough, if you ask the dangerous questions.
Que d'informations incroyables. Ces Russes, curieusement, sont des grands fervents du Christ et de ses saints. Un langage perdu, hein? Un langage perdu qui semble avoir été mis à l'envers. Hein? La petite saison, le monde à l'envers que j'appelle. Des bâtiments qui chantaient. Des briques remplies avec du copper, des toits en copper. Et un système qui vient prendre le contrôle. Hein? On connaît un peu l'histoire des Russes, les Russes aujourd'hui, moi j'ai connu plus jeune, c'était comme reconnu comme ils sont très fermés. Hein? Un peu comme la grand-mère qui vend ses fleurs sur la place publique. N'en dit pas beaucoup. Ils sont très discrets parce que ils se sont fait opprimer, mais pas à peu près. C'est comme l'histoire de Napoléon qui va attaquer Saint-Pétersbourg. Oh, grosse histoire, hein? Oui, mais Napoléon avec sa posture franc-maçonnique. Ce que l'histoire dit pas, c'est que le tsar de l'époque était un grand chum avec Napoléon. L'histoire officielle, mais il y en a qui connaissent la vraie histoire, comment que les deux ont fait beaucoup d'affaires ensemble. Mais pour le spectacle, ils ont fait une guerre. Ah, il y a eu de la destruction. C'est clair qu'il y a eu de la destruction. J'irais même plus que normal. Un peu comme Dresde, hein? On parlait d'un architecte de Dresde, Saint-Pétersbourg, l'histoire de Napoléon. J'ai lu et vu des choses similaires à Dresde. On n'a jamais attaqué cette nuit-là. Non, nous autres non plus, on n'a jamais attaqué. On dirait que les patterns se répètent. Mais que d'informations. Moi, je vous suggère de le réécouter encore. Je trouve que ça met une lumière sur le millénium du Christ. Là, on va rentrer dans le millénium un peu plus en détail. Mais les images des saints et du Christ en Russie sont partout, malgré toute la destruction qu'on voit. Ça demeure, les Russes restent des grands dévots du Christ. Euh, curieusement. Et curieusement, il y avait comme une connaissance incroyable, mais cette connaissance-là était pas seulement en Russie, elle était partout. Et quand tu lis les hagiographies des saints, l'histoire des saints, ils sont cachés, mais que dans les prochains épisodes, je vais vous en dévoiler quelques-uns. Je peux pas tous les dévoiler, mais peut-être que je mettrai des documents, un lien à downloader dans... Oui, je vais essayer de faire ça pour ceux qui voudraient les lire, parce qu'il a fallu les soutirer d'une manière un peu, je dirais, aqueuse de leurs archives. Tout ce qui est raconté dans cette vidéo est raconté dans les hagiographies. C'est-à-dire comment les saints partaient du camp des saints qui est au nord, que leur camp des saints, il y en a qui ont visité, c'était juste incroyable. Ils ont amené leur science, ils parlent que c'est de la science de pré-déluge, même, bien avant le déluge. Comment qu'ils venaient dans les places, les endroits, comme on va dire, Moscou, Saint-Pétersbourg, qui construisaient les buildings, qui montraient comment construire les buildings. Ils nous parlent de plans, d'un langage différent, de notions différentes. Alors, tout ça, des buildings qui calment, j'adore. On vit dans des villes calmes aujourd'hui. Il n'y a rien de calme. De plus ça va, plus c'est laid et stressant. Parce qu'on est dans la petite saison. Alors, ces restes-là de la petite saison sont là pour nous rappeler que, oh, ça a existé, ça n'existe pas présentement, et il y a une raison. Mais la Nouvelle Jérusalem est reconstruite et elle va revenir. Ça, c'est bien écrit. Et vous pensez que toute cette science-là, le Créateur connaît pas ça? Vous pensez que le Créateur, qu'on appelle Dieu, connaît pas cette science-là qui est la vraie science? Oui, on connaît plus que ça, je dirais même. Alors, c'est sûr que quand on entend des témoignages comme ça, quand j'ai lu les hagiographies, c'est sûr qu'il y a un moment où tu fais «Oh, OK, on vit dans un monde, mais tellement à l'envers, c'est pourquoi? Pourquoi qu'on a tout perdu ça?» Dans les écrits, les hagiographies, la fin du millénium, ça s'est pas fait en un an, là. C'est fait sur, je dirais, les 300 dernières années. Puis tranquillement, les saints retiraient les connaissances aussi, parce qu'ils savaient quel temps qui s'en venait. Les exodes, les histoires d'exode que j'ai lues dans les hagiographies, c'est impressionnant. Des villes qui se vident, mais que ce soit de n'importe quel niveau de la société, que ce soit un noble ou un paysan, ensemble, ils partaient vers le nord. Des bateaux, des centaines de bateaux qui partaient, certains dirigeants de ces villes-là qui commençaient déjà la petite saison, qui ne dirigeaient plus selon le millénium. Ouais, ben, les autres, ils aimaient pas ça, là. Wow, 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 tout le monde s'en va, là. Qui je vais diriger? Ah, il y a une transition qui se fait, tu sais, on voit comment que, hein, je sais pas si c'est le KGB, mais comment d'histoires russes qu'on a entendues, comment ils sont contrôlés, que tu n'avais pas le droit de parler, là, ils viennent ramasser l'information. Mais ce phénomène-là s'est passé mais partout, différemment. La Russie, pour moi, d'après moi, comme c'était des fervents dévots du Christ, c'est peut-être ça a peut-être été plus fort qu'à d'autres endroits, mais d'une certaine façon, ça s'est passé partout sur la planète. Donc, moi, c'était la deuxième fois que je le visionnais. Je- c'est incroyable. L'information que dans ça, ça correspond, mais tellement à ce que j'ai lu dans les hagiographies et tellement à ce que j'ai observé quand on voit le copper, quand on voit les briques rouges, pourquoi l'harmonie, tout ça est de la science que j'appelle divine. Mais pour avoir accès à la science divine, il faut vivre d'une façon aussi. Puis aujourd'hui, malheureusement pour nous, on est dans la petite saison. Il y a plein de choses qu'on fait, qu'on pense qui sont normales, et qu'aux yeux du Créateur, c'est pas normal. C'est pas comme ça qu'il a créé l'homme. Alors, ça nous déconnecte tout. La connexion Internet avec le Créateur et le Christ est tout déconnecté. Ceux qui construisaient ça, ils n'étaient pas déconnectés. Ils ont eu la chance de vivre le millénium, puis dans les écrits, c'est beaucoup mentionné la chance de ceux qui pourront vivre cette époque. Mais je vous rassure, l'époque qu'on vit, c'est écrit aussi qu'elle est là pour une raison et qu'il y en aura une fin. Et que le monde qu'on vient d'observer, les, les restes, hein, on voit ça comme dans de la brume, c'est flou. Ah, il va être encore beaucoup plus grandiose. Donc, on se calme, on vit ce qu'on a à vivre présentement dans les temps qu'on est, mais il y a une suite à tout ça. La suite de la petite saison, on va le voir, on va l'observer. Je vais laisser les autres parler, comme je dis, ils ont fait des travaux des, incroyables, là, je trouve super bien faits, qui ont plus de connaissances, mais après la petite saison, c'est le grand jugement. Après le grand jugement, c'est la fin du monde que l'on connaît, mais c'est pas la fin du monde. C'est le début du nouveau monde. Mais pour accéder au nouveau monde, comme le Créateur l'a conçu, il faut qu'entre les deux oreilles, on soit connecté. Mais, comme je vous dis, tout ce que je dis, c'est pas nécessaire d'acquérir la connaissance intellectuellement. C'est dans le cœur. Donc, Il y a plein de personnes qui vont vivre sans avoir ces connaissances-là, mais tout est écrit dans le cœur. Donc, ils vont avoir accès à la nouvelle Jérusalem. J'en suis convaincu. Aucun doute. On va rentrer dans notre fameux millénium avec la vidéo de femme qui a fait une série que je vous contais au début, que pour moi, ça a été vraiment une espèce de synthèse de tout ce que j'avais observé, mais elle l'a mis synthétisé en 12 vidéos, puis je trouvais que c'était bien fait, ça m'a beaucoup calmé. Ça a comme mis les morceaux du puzzle en place. J'avais commencé à ramasser, mais il me manquait peut-être deux, trois morceaux. Puis, curieusement, comme je vous dis, elle a disparu de l'Internet, mais un peu, je la comprends, un peu comme le témoignage que le grand-père a voulu livrer, hein, à son petit-fils en disant, écris ça, là, moi je m'en vais. C'est un peu le but aussi de mes vidéos, là. C'est un peu moins bien fait, je dirais. Comprenez? J'ai ramassé beaucoup d'informations. J'ai dit, il faut que je la partage parce que j'essaie d'en parler les gens comprennent pas. Puis c'est normal. Je leur en veux pas. De parler juste comme ça, j'ai perdu mais beaucoup d'amis, beaucoup de monde. Je les comprends parce que tout d'un coup, ah, qu'est-ce qui arrive à Fred, là? Il se met à parler de toutes sortes d'affaires bizarres, là. Et c'est normal. J'en veux à personne, hein, de s'éloigner. Est-ce que c'est facile à tous les jours? Non, 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 c'est pas facile. Mais j'assume. J'assume, c'est un peu pourquoi je fais ces séries-là, mais j'ai pas l'intention de m'éterniser, là. Je ferai pas une série sur la conspiration, puis, tu sais, déjà, je trouve que j'ai mis beaucoup plus de temps sur les mensonges, mais bon, je trouvais que c'était important pour peut-être aider les gens à tranquillement enlever les couches comme une pleure d'oignon pour voir l'oignon. Ah, OK. Bon, c'est peut-être pas une bonne analogie, mais bon, ouais, on va, mais Fred, on va retirer ça du discours. Je pense que ça passe pas bien. Enfin, vous voyez ce que je veux dire? Je ne vais pas m'attarder, là. C'est le dernier chapitre de ma série d'émissions, de présentation. Je parle du millénium du Christ, c'est le but. Qu'est-ce qui est dans le temps qu'on est? Après, c'est terminé. C'est un peu comme le grand-père. J'aurais dit ce que j'ai ramassé, ce que j'ai trouvé, en espérant que mes neveux, mes nièces, des amis ou quelques personnes puissent les écouter, mais ça se peut qu'ils les écoutent jamais. Ou si ça peut être une personne seulement, tant mieux. Si ça peut aider une personne, tant mieux. Parce que personnellement, j'avais besoin de le sortir pour le montrer. J'ai dit, je peux pas avoir ramassé tout ça, fait toutes ces années de recherche-là pour laisser dormir ça sur un disque dur. Ça ferait dur. Je trouve que Fred, tu ferais dur si tu laisses ça dormir sur un disque dur. J'ai dit, je vais le montrer, ça sera pas parfait, hein. Je veux dire, regarde, je dis que je parle pas, je parle encore. Mais c'est un peu brouillon. Peut-être j'ai fait du mieux que je peux pour essayer d'avoir une suite que je trouvais, on va dire, logique. Mais bon, à vous maintenant de faire vos recherches. Mais là, on va aller justement dans le sujet. Mais je trouvais, personnellement, wow, que d'informations fascinantes. Mais on va aller maintenant dans voir le millénium, comment le temps a pu être notre histoire transformée. Et comme je vous dis, cette femme-là qui a fait ces séries-là, c'était vraiment bien fait. J'en ai d'autres épisodes. Peut-être que je vais en remettre d'autres, mais sinon, je vais vous montrer à quel endroit. Ah ben tiens, c'est vrai, on va le voir sur un site Internet, celui-là. Fait que déjà, sur le site, sur ce compte-là, probablement, je vais le mettre ici, Fistful of Truth. Il y en a d'autres. Alors, je sais pas si la personne qui a créé ce site-là a toutes ces vidéos, mais je sais qu'il y en a un autre site que j'ai donné beaucoup de vidéos, mais on va voir les principaux. Alors, on l'écoute à l'instant même.
Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll go over the timeline I've created, which I now believe to be a more accurate representation of human history and our place within it. This timeline will portray an interpretation of biblical eschatology called preterism. Preterism is defined by the idea that all or most biblical prophecies have already been fulfilled, which includes the tribulation and the second coming of Christ. The vast majority of modern-day preterists have mainly come to this conclusion based on scriptural and historical evidence and aren't yet aware of the large amount of additional evidence compiled by the alternative history community. By combining all of this data together, I believe a very sound case is made for the timeline deception theory. So let's get into the first slide. I'll be unveiling parts of the timeline as we go. I'll try not to get into too much detail along the way, as every little part can be dissected and made into its own video, so I'll try to be as generalized as possible. There may be an updated version in the future as new information comes to light. So the first major event in human history is of course the creation of the first humans, Adam and Eve. It seems like the earth itself is probably older than this event. However, we can say that our history as human beings on the earth begins with Adam and Eve. This part of the timeline is when most events of the Bible took place. I'm not sure how many years this is, but if mankind is 6,000 years old, a figure that has been extrapolated from genealogy records in the Bible, then this portion of history may be approximately 5,000 years. I'm not completely sure about how truly accurate that number is, but it's not that important right now. I won't be adding any biblical events to this part of the timeline. Instead, I'll only be characterizing this period in time by the fact that Satan was free to roam the earth. The next part of the timeline is the birth of Jesus, and 33 years later, the next major event occurs, which is his death and subsequent resurrection. Now we get to the portion that radically departs from the timeline of human history that most believe. Here we have the Great Tribulation kicking off just 30 years after the death of Jesus. This event, that most people believe to be right around the corner today, appears to be well into our past. When we read the New Testament with a new mindset, it becomes clear that Jesus repeatedly told his disciples that the events known as the Great Tribulation would be happening within their lifetimes and not 2,000 years in the future. Here are a few key verses. In Matthew, Jesus said, "Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Again Jesus said, "But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the kingdom of God." And in Matthew, after Jesus describes the tribulation and its end, he goes on to say, "Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." The Great Tribulation and the Battle of Armageddon, events in our history that were too big to sweep under the rug, are disguised in our history books as the fall of the Roman Empire, culminating in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Of course, the dates we are given for these events are out of order, which is to purposely deceive us. We are told that the fall of the Roman Empire gradually happened over the course of hundreds of years, when in reality, most or perhaps even all of it may have happened quickly in Jesus' day and culminated in the tribulation. If you're aware of how severely our historical record has been tampered with, then this shouldn't sound too outlandish. So where was the mysterious figure known as the Antichrist in all of this? Well, there seems to be plenty of evidence already compiled by even mainstream sources indicating that Emperor Nero fits the bill of the Antichrist described in Revelation. A quick internet search will yield numerous sources that have already correlated the biblical figure known as the Antichrist to the historical figure known as Emperor Nero. I'll probably make a more detailed video about this someday, but in the meantime you should have no trouble finding resources that back up this claim. As most of us already know, the tribulation is a horrible calamity that lasts 7 years, where an Antichrist figure rises up and deceives many while unmercilessly persecuting those who refuse to submit to him and choose Jesus Christ. At the end of the tribulation, Jesus comes down out of heaven, an event that is known as the Second Coming. Satan, the Antichrist, and the kings of the earth briefly try to go to war with Jesus, but they are immediately defeated. Satan and the Antichrist are sent to hell, and all of the mortals who were on the side of evil were killed by the sword of Jesus. The people who believed in Christ but survived the tribulation will continue forward in their natural bodies into what is called the Messianic reign or millennial kingdom of Christ. Now that everyone has been sorted out, what immediately follows is an event called the First Resurrection. This is where all of those who believed in Christ and died during the short time between Jesus' ministry and the end of the tribulation are resurrected and given new bodies. This includes martyrs and all others who died of any other cause even before the tribulation started. In 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul wrote, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first." And in Revelation chapter 20, the Apostle John prophesied that he saw thrones, and they sat on them, and the ability to judge was given to them. Then he saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. In Mark, Jesus said, "For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." And in 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul wrote, "For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed." Going forward, we have a new classification of beings who were once mortal humans like us, but have now received a new, eternal body that makes them like angels. This new body is often referred to as the glorified body. These people are often, but not always, depicted with a halo around their head. They will fulfill particular roles and duties in Christ's kingdom for the next 1,000 years. They are generally referred to as saints. I'll be making a more detailed video about this subject very soon. What unfolds is what we think of as our history, minus a bunch of stuff that has either been grossly misrepresented or just never happened at all. From the start, everyone goes to work creating a new civilization, presumably amongst the aftermath of the Great Tribulation. We see an explosion of creative energy in every area of life. What immediately emerges is a society dominated by Christian ethics and virtues. The people spend their days laboring in some way for God's kingdom. The people in their mortal bodies will now live longer lifespans and bear children as normal. The new people born into the kingdom now have the choice to accept or reject Christ. While it was the golden age of human history, it was in no way perfect, as mortal mankind in its fallen state still struggled with the problem of sin. It does appear that there were conflicts along the way, the true nature of which is unclear. We can see the rapid progress of the millennial kingdom through the general art and architecture. The kingdom ended with what are the greatest achievements during what we call the Industrial Revolution. The millennial kingdom stretched out across the entire earth, and that includes the founding of America from sea to shining sea. With Jesus Christ as a literal king on earth, the people who got their glorified bodies ruled alongside of him as they occupied the higher offices of his government and fulfilled various other roles. These people, in their glorified bodies, have much higher capabilities than we do in our natural bodies, appearing to be able to interact with the physical and spiritual realms simultaneously. I believe that it is because of their hand in things that we see incredible accomplishments across the board that have never been truly replicated since. If you've been researching Tartaria and seeing everything in our past in a brand new light, then all of this should make sense. I simply refer to parts of this epoch as early, middle, and late kingdom. This is a span of just 1,000 years and not 2,000 like we have been taught. So if you couldn't already guess, this isn't the period that we live in. Now we get to the part of the timeline that includes our modern world. When the 1,000 years end, Jesus and the saints go back up to heaven. To my current knowledge, the Bible doesn't actually mention anything about where they go, but I assume it's back up to heaven based on the state of the world we live in now. What it does mention is that Satan is loosed from his prison for a short period of time. The Bible does not tell us exactly how many years this period will last, only that it is a short time. Again in Revelation chapter 20, John wrote that an angel cast Satan into the bottomless pit and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season. What happens next is the strangest and most perplexing part of all of this, which is the second resurrection. To my knowledge, there is only one Bible verse that mentions the second resurrection, calling those who take part in it simply the rest of the dead. And again in Revelation chapter 20 it states, "But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished." And it's important to understand the context of this part since the next line can be confusing. Now, if I had entertained the preterist view of the Bible before knowing anything about Tartaria, I would not know how to work the idea of a second resurrection into my worldview. This event would have to be in our past, and nowhere in our history books does it say that a large group of people came back to life one day. If we still believe the history that we've been given, there would be no way to realistically incorporate this idea into the preterist narrative. However, after examining the multitude of anomalies in our past, I believe a connection can be made between this part of the Bible and what has already been deemed the reset. Thanks to everyone who has researched in the area of alternative history, a sizable amount of data has been collected that seems to indicate that a large group of people were inserted out of nowhere into a glorious pre-existing civilization. This seems to have happened around 1800 our time, give or take up to 50 years. A more precise time frame has not yet been narrowed down. Many videos have been made, while others out there have quietly spent many hours dissecting the earliest video and photographic evidence that is available. The general consensus is that there was something very peculiar going on at this time, and that the people generally seem like they don't quite belong amidst their surroundings. We have found photographs and footage that appear to be faked or staged. Suddenly, there is a multitude of displaced orphans of mysterious origins. We see children working in factories that were clearly never intended for them. We have learned about the creepy infantoriums where one could adopt a living infant from the amusement park. After examining historical records with a new mindset, it seems that a new group of people were inserted out of nowhere. At times, these new people appear to be picking up where a previous group left off. Without having most of the general knowledge I'm conveying in this video, we had already come to observe some type of reset of civilization that had been completely hidden from us, and we deemed these people as the new arrivals or the reset people. In addition to the anomalies in the people themselves, this period is also characterized by a miscellany of destructive events such as wars, fires, flooding, and so-called earthquakes. We had already suspected that a transfer of power took place, going from good to evil. Based on scriptural, historical, and physical evidence, I believe that the Messianic reign ended, Satan was loosed from his prison, and the second resurrection all happened around the year 1800 our time, give or take up to 50 years. On a side note, there will be a part 2 of this video where I'll go over how I think the keeping of time truly works. So if you're confused about the discrepancy between the timeline we are given and the amount of time that I'm saying has actually passed, I'll do my best to explain that in part 2. The last major biblical event left to occur on this earth as we know it is what is described as a final battle that God does not allow to fully escalate. This event is immediately followed by final judgment, which could be considered a third and final resurrection. I think we can safely say that these events have not happened yet, making these some of the only prophecies yet to be fulfilled. And in Revelation chapter 20, John wrote that, when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven, and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. It seems like the people of earth will be assembled for this great battle, and a particular nation will be invaded. But just before the war truly breaks out, God will step in before all hell breaks loose. This is the final moment and concludes the great saga of the battle between good and evil on earth. What exactly is meant by Gog and Magog, or what is the camp of the saints and the beloved city, is up for interpretation. Now everyone who ever lived will be gathered for final judgment. Those who accepted Christ will be given their glorified bodies and become saints on God's new earth. Those who rejected him will be cast into the lake of fire. Now that everyone has been sorted out once again, God will recreate the earth and the heavens. God will then bring the glorious city that he has already built in heaven down to earth. God will then rule from this city right here on earth with us. Humanity will be fully restored from its fallen state, and there will no longer be any death or sin. With our new bodies, it appears that we will be given the unique quality of being granted access to both the spiritual and physical realms simultaneously. The earth will belong to us once again, and yes, we will live happily ever after. You can read a more detailed description of the new earth in Revelation chapter 21. All in all, we have been tricked into thinking that we were generally back here on the timeline, at the tribulation and before the millennial kingdom. In fact, just 6 months ago, I was sure that the tribulation had begun. Satan didn't want us to know about the millennial kingdom because all of this information corroborates the Bible in a very powerful way, and there's so much more. I now believe that in reality, we actually live way up here on the timeline. I base this off of several things. The millennial kingdom seems to have ended no later than 1850. That means this event happened about 170 years ago, at the very least. In Revelation, it states that at the end of the millennial kingdom, the devil will be loosed for a little season. In some translations, it is a little while or a short time. So what could constitute a little season? If the millennial kingdom was 1,000 years, and that is considered a decent chunk of time, what would constitute a little season based off of that? Would 170 years? 200 years, or even a little more? I think so, but probably not much more than that. Now hold that thought and imagine the real world that we live in today and what has begun to unfold all around us. This presentation is not to fearmonger. In fact, I believe this information will do quite the opposite. While it does feel like we are indeed in the end times, it's a different end times than what we thought. With this revelation, I think we can live our lives more at ease, as the tribulation came and went a long time ago. Jesus assured us that nothing would ever be as bad as the tribulation again. Jesus said, "For then shall be great tribulation, such has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be." I think it's very important for us to understand where we truly are in time, so that as these end times events unfold, we can stay calm and level-headed. While I'm sure there will be ups and downs from here on out, I believe that with some preparedness, we can stay safe and out of harm's way until the last day. The long-term plans of the enemy and the horrible dystopian future that we seem to be barreling into will not completely unfold, as his time will be cut short. In fact, we may very well be the last group of humans to ever walk this earth as we know it, and we may be the ones who are alive on the last day and who will be spared a natural death. I hope this information can bring you a new outlook on life, just as it has done for me. While I'm sure that what lies ahead will be fascinating, to say the least, we will be able to press on, knowing that the days of this world are numbered. We can stay positive and comfort those who may begin to panic, as we understand that this will not be spiraling into the chaos of the Great Tribulation. And as the signs begin to become more apparent that a war is brewing, we will not be consumed with fear. Instead, we will rejoice as we know it's almost time to meet the Lord. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. My next video will be a part 2, where I will do my best to explain why there is a discrepancy of about 1,000 years between the fake timeline and the real timeline, as well as share some additional thoughts. Thanks for watching.
Tout était bien résumé. En fait, je suis très content de vous le présenter. Enfin, on arrive à la petite saison. C'est spécial aussi parce que moi, je l'ai vu et entendu il y a de nombreuses années. Et depuis, il y a beaucoup d'eau qui ont coulé sous les ponts, comme on dit, dont la sortie des hagiographies, ces écrits cachés qui ont été par des hackers ont réussi à arracher aux archives inaccessibles. Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'elle dit qui correspondent encore à ces écrits-là. Et je l'ai mis pour la conclusion, hein, c'est restons calmes. Peu importe le chaos qu'il va y avoir dans notre monde, restons calmes. C'est pour ça, souvent, j'ai essayé d'en parler aux gens. On est souvent dans cette vision du monde qu'il faut l'énergie, il faut trouver l'énergie gratuite. Tout, je me retrouve dans des discussions des fois où je passe pour le méchant parce que je dis ça a déjà existé. Très bien. C'était le millénium du Christ. On l'a vu dans l'autre vidéo d'avant sur la vie en Russie, la fin du millénium, sur comment les bâtiments étaient construits, et toute la science cinétique qu'il y avait autour de ça. C'est ça qu'on pourrait, on a accès, tout pourrait se redécouvrir. Mais puis ça se redécouvre continuellement aussi. Tu as toujours des chercheurs qui trouvent des choses, mais bon, ils se font mettre des bâtons sur les roues à 95% du temps parce que on est dans la petite saison. Hein? Alors, on a le goût de se révolter. Il y en a qui se révoltent. Hein? C'est pas pour rien qu'il y a tout ça est fait pour toujours créer de la division, Hein? L'espace, pas l'espace, la terre plate, la terre ronde. Non, t'as raison. Le blanc, le noir, les républicains, pas les conservateurs, les républicains, puis c'est quoi l'autre? Je me souviens plus du nom. Au Canada, c'est les conservateurs avec les libéraux. Euh, Toujours cette espèce de bataille mentale, la television, les internets qui nous... On est dans la petite saison. Alors, moi, le premier, je me fais prendre, là. Je me fais prendre souvent avec tout ça. Mais c'est pour ça qu'en mettant cette vidéo-là, en le revoyant, parce que ça faisait longtemps que je l'avais vu, je trouve ça, j'avoue, je me souviens pourquoi, au début, quand je l'avais vu, j'avais fait, mais là, elle résume très bien ce que je pense au fond de moi. Mais bon, hein, on se fait avoir, on est dedans. Alors, c'est pas toujours simple non plus, là. On vit des moments il y a toutes sortes de choses qui peuvent arriver dans nos vies qui font que c'est pas facile de rester calme. C'est pas facile d'être serein. Mais je reviens à sa conclusion. La petite saison, c'est une chose qu'elle a peut-être pas dit, puis que moi j'ai lu, puis que ça m'a fasciné dans la Bible. À un endroit, c'est dit que une journée de Dieu, c'est 1000 ans. Ah, une journée de Dieu, c'est 1000 ans d'humain. D'où peut-être le millénium du Christ. Moi, je l'associe quand j'ai vu les dates, que tout était calculé. La journée près, ça m'a impressionné. Je dis, OK, on est comme sur une gamme de musique, la création avec l'humain, on va dire, l'histoire de l'homme, hein, créé à l'image de Dieu. On est comme une gamme de musique qui monte chaque note et chaque note a un événement qui sert à arriver à la fin. Pour moi, la dernière note, si on prend la note de la à la, ben c'était le sol. C'était le millénium du Christ. Nous, bon, nous autres, on est sur le sol dièse, la tension, avant de retomber sur le la qui sera le nouveau monde. Alors, restons calmes. C'est le message de son vidéo. Je trouvais que la musique était très bien choisie aussi. J'avais une autre vidéo très intéressante, mais qui est peut-être un peu longue. Là, ça fait déjà 2 heures et demie. Je vais le placer dans le prochain épisode. Et elle, j'ai aussi d'autres vidéos. Elle parlait de son... Je vais voir, je vais revisionner un peu ces vidéos, voir lequel que je vais vous présenter. Mais comme je vous dis, vous avez vu le site. Vous pouvez retourner sur le site qui avait son vidéo. Il va sûrement en avoir d'autres. Je vous mettrai les liens aussi éventuellement, peut-être au dernier épisode, de personnes ressources. Je trouve qu'ils ont des bonnes choses à raconter sur le millénium, puis sur les temps dans lesquels on vit. Je vais mettre aussi je vais mettre Jason Jack, que vous pouvez aller voir, mais là, je vous en parle, mais c'était son vidéo que je voulais montrer, parce que lui, c'était aussi une espèce de résumé de tout ce qu'on a vu par rapport à l'époque qu'on est. On va commencer avec ça au prochain épisode. Mais lui, présentement, il est en train de faire des très bons épisodes sur les hagiographies en anglais, où ce qui lit les textes qu'on a réussi à avoir, qui nous parlent de l'époque du millénium, des saints, de comment que ça se passait, puis il les met en relation avec les textes de la Bible, c'est plus qu'impressionnant. C'est comme, wow! Alors, je vais peut-être en mettre aussi un épisode, un extrait, mais je vous dirigerai vers aller voir plus sur son site. Mais, comme elle dit très bien, comme je trouve qu'elle, ce qu'on vient d'entendre, elle a fait une série de 12, puis on dirait qu'elle a disparu de l'Internet. C'est comme, c'est une chose qui m'avait impressionné, c'est un peu mon but aussi, je veux pas m'attarder trop longtemps, hein, un peu comme, je dirais, je trouve la belle image de la vieille dame qui vendait des fleurs à Moscou, quand l'autre lui posait des questions sur le passé. Oui, ça chantait. Les buildings chantaient, mais faut pas en parler. Qui n'en parle pas trop, hein. Comme je vous dis, à un moment donné, quand tu le sais, on n'a pas besoin de tout déterrer. Faut juste continuer à vivre dans le temps qu'on est, du mieux qu'on peut, aider les autres, hein, du mieux qu'on peut. C'est un peu mon but de faire tout ça parce que j'ai, c'est un peu une tâche que je me suis donnée et j'espère servira au moins à une personne, mais j'ai pas l'intention d'avoir des millions de vues, là. Je vais garder ça discret. C'était pour les gens autour de moi en premier. Peut-être d'autres, mais peut-être ça servira pas à personne, mais au moins j'aurais fait l'exercice de le faire. Si ça peut aider justement à rester calme dans les temps qu'on vit, dans le monde stressé et comme à l'envers, que souvent on le sent comme ce que je raconte, ce qu'elle raconte. Je suis né, on dirait, d'une certaine façon, avec cet instinct-là, sans savoir être capable de mettre des mots sur le phénomène. C'est beaucoup ce que je chantais quand j'étais jeune. Puis plus que j'étais jeune, plus que j'observais les adultes, plus que le monde me semblait étrange et à l'envers. Naturellement, j'ai grandi et je me suis fait avoir par tout le monde aussi, puis j'ai oublié. On oublie, hein, un peu comme notre russe dans notre vieux russe qui est, OK, moi, je suis facteur, je parle pas parce que, je veux dire, si je parle, je vais me ramasser en prison. Je fais ma vie, ce que j'ai à faire, mais sur son lit de mort, il a senti vraiment le besoin d'en parler. Il dit, OK, là, faut que ça sorte. Peut-être un peu ce qui m'arrive aussi dans les dernières années. J'ai passé beaucoup de temps à faire toutes ces recherches, essayer d'en parler souvent, mais je dirais à 95% du temps, ça crée des conflits, c'est, j'ai dit, il faut que vous voyez, tu sais, c'est pour ça que j'ai mis des images, essayé d'aider par des images. Mais bon, en même temps, je suis conscient que même avec les images, il y a des choses il y en a qui seront pas capables d'accepter, puis c'est correct. Puis ils vont me traiter de fou, puis d'illuminé, puis de tout ça. Je suis prêt à ça. Même si je ne mentirais pas que c'est pas simple. C'est pas simple. Non. C'est pas simple à accepter, mais c'est comme ça. En espérant que cet épisode et les prochains réussiront peut-être à vous dresser un portrait de ce qui se cachait derrière ces deux grands mensonges. Car les premiers épisodes que j'ai faits, hein, j'arrêtais pas de le répéter, je vous montre, j'essaie de vous dévoiler les deux grands mensonges pour, euh, pour voir la vérité qui est cachée en arrière. Alors, je vais avoir peut-être 2 ou 3 autres épisodes maximum pour parler du millénium, mais je vais, comme je dis, je vais vous diriger vers des gens qui ont fait de meilleures recherches que moi, que j'ai pas besoin ils vont expliquer les choses d'une meilleure façon que moi. Moi, ce que j'essaie de faire, c'est un portrait global. On pourrait dire l'ensemble de ma série, on pourrait dire comment qu'ils appellent ça, là, le, 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 le book pour les nuls, là. Les épisodes, je dirais pas pour les nuls, parce que je crois pas que vous êtes nuls du tout. Mais c'était une introduction à tout ça. Essayer de démêler, parce que c'est pas simple. C'est pas simple, c'est pour ça que quand je vous montre, en plus qu'ils travaillent des deux côtés, hein, on est continuellement bombardé. Ah, lui, à gauche, à droite, lui c'est un bon, lui c'est un mauvais, lui c'est. On a besoin de calme. Le calme vient quand on se reconnecte à Dieu. Puis je vais le répéter. C'est dur à accepter pour beaucoup, mais il y a juste un Dieu, puis il y a juste le Christ qui est la voie. Hein, on connaît les anges déchus qui aiment bien se faire adorer eux autres aussi, dont le boss, on va dire, qui a souvent dit je vais prendre la place de Dieu. Bon, ben c'est pour ça qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres religions aussi. Mais observez, l'idolâtrie, on n'est pas supposé de faire de l'idolâtrie, à part le Créateur, le seul. Puis, croyez-moi, là, je suis pas en train de défendre un camp et de dire c'est moi qui ai raison, c'est moi, là, non, là. Tout le monde est libre. On a le libre arbitre. J'essaie pas de gagner une bataille de vérité, quoi que ce soit. Je vous souhaite que Dieu vous illumine un jour, puis à un moment donné, quand j'appelle la connexion recommence, je sais pas comment expliquer ça autrement, c'est comme, oh, OK. Parce que moi aussi, j'ai été enfiroppé dans tout cet univers de grande déception. Puis, j'ai encore beaucoup de pleurs, j'en suis sûr, à défaire, puis probablement que je les déferai jamais tout au complet aussi pour dire on est dans ce temps-là. Mais au moins, en sachant qu'on est dans ce temps-là, en sachant que ce temps-là n'est pas éternel, en sachant qu'il y a du grandiose après, faut juste être calme, rester calme. Sur ce, en haut, c'est de l'eau. Alors, au revoir et au prochain épisode.